Hi, good morning, everybody. I would like to call to order the special school board meeting of the Lake County School Board. Today is Monday, August 21st, 2017, and let's go ahead and start off with a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you. I pledge allegiance. All right, hello and welcome everybody. Happy Eclipse Day. We have a special school board meeting this morning in lieu of a workshop because we have one actionable item on our agenda today. That's the operational agreement for the Health Sciences Collegiate Academy. We have one public input card that is specific to one of the other items on our agenda, so we'll address that when it gets there. And all right. Actually, we have two public input cards specific to items on the agenda, so we'll get to those when we get to those items. So we'll start off with the Health Sciences Agreement. And I believe we have Dr. Sedor here this morning. Thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you.
So if we have some questions, we'll be able to invite him up. Or would you like to?
If you have questions,
Okay.
I'd be happy to address them.
All right, thanks so much. All right, Superintendent.
I think you all are familiar with this one. It's been around a while, and we're glad to finally bring it to the closure for this school year. What you have is the agreement specific to the 17-18 school year, and with an agreement with Lake Sumter and the partners that we're going to be getting to get back together in the next 2 weeks at the earliest to begin the review for 18-19, since a lot of the things that were on the table have been on the table for a couple of years that need to be addressed, and so we're going to be working on that. So at this time, I'm going to recommend approval of 3.01 as the operational agreement between Lake Sumter State College and the school board.
All right, there's a motion,
So
or a
moved.
recommendation from the superintendent.
So moved.
Motion by Bill,
Second.
and a second by Stephanie. Board members, any questions or comments before we vote on this one? All right, looks like we're ready to put it to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, that carries unanimously, 4-0. Okay. Wonderful to have that partnership. Thank you so much.
All right.
And with that, we'll move into the next item on our agenda, which is the review of the student progression plan. Are there certain folks that you'd like to have come forward for this one?
Yeah, we do. Dr. Chris Landry, she is our Director of Student Services. This is her document, a rather large document that she and her team have spent a lot of time working on, and so she's going to give us an update on the changes and answer any questions that you might have about the current document. As you well know, most of this is driven by legislation, so there's some flexibility to customize it, but very little. As the legislative session ends, she goes back to the document and makes the revisions according to any new laws that have passed, and so she'll update you on those.
All right, very good. And Dr. Landry, if we could pause for just 3 short minutes, we'll invite Mr. Tibbetts on forward, and perhaps he might have questions or comments that you would be able to then address in your presentation. Thanks so much.
I really don't have a lot of questions.
All right.
I would comment, it's an incredible document for a committee of 32. You guys have got to stop working with committees of 32. I don't know how you get anything done. There's a lot of stuff in there. Some of it statute driven that for someone like me is very upsetting. For instance, I wouldn't be able to go to school this year and start kindergarten because my birthday isn't until the middle of September, and I'd have to wait a whole extra year. Sucky rule, but it's in there. You can't do anything about it. I thought it was very interesting that the 16-year-old who drops out of school to get a job gets his driver's license taken away from him. One doesn't really have anything to do with another, but I know it's a great threat for parents. If you drop out of school, you can't drive, but 2 things. One, on page 102, it talks about ESE and programs for disabled and gifted students. Then proceeds from page 102 to 114 to tell us what we're going to do about disabled students in not one single word about what we will do for gifted students. And reading the whole document, it is apparent that the school district needs to examine a program. And a program is not AP courses. A program is not promoting someone a grade. And I would love to see the district spend some time exploring a true gifted program in the same way that they have programs for disabled students. I will share with you what my daughter said in 7th grade. Mom and Dad, I wish I was slow so I could have classes like the slow kids have. She had an IQ of over 180. She needed special attention. She truly was disabled. The other thing that needs to be addressed, I see it as a volunteer. I know that there's no such thing as social probation. There are students being passed along that shouldn't be, that can't read. I now have 4th graders that should never have gotten out of 1st grade or need incredible intervention. So we need to spend a lot more time those at that end of the spectrum and helping them to keep up. But all in all, it's a wonderful document. You did a great job, and thank you for your efforts.
All right, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to read such a lengthy document.
Yes.
I don't know that we have very many citizens who have that level of dedication, so we appreciate it. Dr.
May
Landry.
I address
Oh, absolutely.
one part?
Yes, please.
Okay, regarding gifted, because I certainly do not want you to think we don't have a gifted program. We certainly do. It is primarily focused on elementary grades, and we have a program whereas children go to a center school when they're very young for 1 day a week, and then we have a self-contained gifted program wherein those children all learn together in 3rd through 5th. The reason that there's not a lot of time spent here in the progression is because they follow the same progression as children who are regular ed children. Student with disabilities have certain accommodations and programming opportunities because they're disabled that gifted and regular education students don't have. Okay, so I wanted to let you know we do. Do we need to do more? I think we could do more, yeah. Okay, all right. And this is not reaching over there for some reason. Okay. So good morning, Superintendent Cornegie, board members, Mr. Johnson. So I'm here with you this morning to present the changes to the student progression plan. As student progression goes, this was a very light legislative year. There was one major piece of legislation, House Bill 7069, and I'm going to show you along the way how that impacted our student progression. Some things in 7069 go in the progression, lots of things do not go in the progression. So it was a interesting piece of legislation. So first, I just wanted to remind us all why we even have a student progression plan. Well, Florida gives us the constitutional and statutory power to take control of the operation of public K-12 education. And so specifically, it's called out promotion and graduation of students. So per the state, we have that obligation, and per our school board policy, Chapter 2 is all about governance of the school board, and that's where our local policy is, okay? This is our committee. This is that massive 32-person committee. And it has to be big because there are so many pieces and parts to this document, and it's a dynamic document from year to year, and we want to make sure that all the pieces are current and up to date. So we do have a big committee, but everyone's wonderful to work with. I also wanted to give a shout out again to Ms. Sherry Owens. She redid our progression plan cover, and I really liked it. Certainly looks very professional. So throughout the document, I just wanted to point out some things that you'll see that I won't cover today because I don't want this to be a very lengthy presentation. But throughout the entire document, you'll see that links have been updated. Some of them were dead links, they went someplace they didn't mean to go. And then some program guides and handbooks were also updated. So for example, the ESOL program guide, there's a new form that was added. The next bullet, statutes and school board policy have been added. In going through it this year, I found places where we were saying things pretty direct, but didn't have any statute there to support it. So I went back and made sure that all those are there. And then throughout the document, there's quite a bit of language change just for clarification. So you'll see with regard to MTSS and problem solving and monitoring especially, there's lots of wording clarification. I'm not going to go over all of that with you unless you have questions. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through the document, pointing out just the major changes. And please feel free to stop me and ask questions as we go. So in the big first section, admission enrollment transfers, this is a very large section. On page 10, we had in the progression last year, Office of Administration would handle disputes regarding residency, and so that's changed to the Office of Transformation. It's the only change there. On page 11, we have new wording on educational choice. It's very brief, but it does portray that we now have educational choice. Okay, on page 12, the Compact on Educational Opportunity for Military Children, a new version came out, and so they have some new wording, and so I simply took out the old wording, put in the new wording, so that we're completely up to date. And then in my overzealousness to do that, I took out some stuff I should not have taken out, very specific to what we do when they come to us when they're seniors and in high school. So I wanted to just point out that number 2 and number 3 there on page 13, they're red and redlined, okay, in your draft, but they will not be. Those are unremoved, if you will. So those will stay. Okay. Under McKinney-Vento, homeless, on page 14, there was a change in legislature that children awaiting foster care are no longer considered homeless. Now, they aren't losing any of their services. In fact, they have been moved to a new category under Every Student Succeeds Act, and they have their own category, and that's actually over on 16, so page 16. So we've added the language regarding foster care. Okay. Going along. Okay. On page 17, starting on 17, where it says custody, documentation, student access, all the way over, the next couple of pages are all about student access, access to students and access to student records. I wasn't sure when I started really thinking about this document why this is in here, because it doesn't really have anything to do with student progression. And given that this is a large document, I think that we might think about taking this out. It's in this code of conduct, which is where it belongs. But what I've done here, I spent some time on the phone with Mr. Briones from our attorney's office this last year, and we kind of wordsmithed very carefully for the code of conduct. So what I did was I took that language and put it in here. So if at least it's going to be in here, it's going to match exactly. I think it could be up for discussion whether or not this belongs in here, because it doesn't really have anything to do with progression. Okay. Okay, so on page 25, the state uniform transfer of students in the middle grades was repealed. I wanted to point this out to you, but in truth, nothing has changed. The Florida Administrative Code combined middle and high school uniform transfer of credits and put them together under one code. Okay, so Ms. Cole and we just took all that language and put it in one area, mocking what the state had done. Okay, so on 28, Page 28, that language there was all about personalized learning, and so it has all been deleted. I have a point for discussion. I decided to move it to the end just in case we run out of time and we don't want to do it today, so I'm going to skip that piece. Okay, so on to section 2. Under state and district assessments, our testing department made beautiful and informative tables. They are all new in here. This year, you'll notice some of the state required assessments have gone back to paper pencil. And so we're working on that adjustment.
Can I just ask a quick question about that specifically? I noticed that some of them did go back to paper, but some of them did not. So the changes that we see in this document are specific to the changes that were made in the legislation in regards to which ones can be paper pencil, correct?
Among other things, yes, it is reflected in this document.
Okay. So 4th and 5th grade is going to be computerized reading and mathematics.
I couldn't
3rd through
verify
5th
that.
grade mathematics.
for
It's on the
sure,
yeah, it's
but-
in here. I just wanted to make sure that that was the only option that we had for that. The 3rd grade takes their math test on the computer this year? Okay. 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 And I did too, so I
That's
like,
what I thought
like big circles,
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. 4th and 5th grade reading, in this document, 4th and 5th grade reading takes their test on the computer, and 3rd through 5th grade mathematics is on the computer. So I was just curious if that was, I know we had some changes, but I wasn't sure of what was indicative. That'd be great.
Yes, let's double check that.
Okay,
All right.
I'm sorry, I know, you're going
No,
through this, and I know you said ask questions, but not, and you
Yes,
specifically
yes,
said
yes.
something about the table changes and some were computer-based testing, so that's why I interjected there.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if this is not the most recent one, because I know there were modifications to it to comply with statute, and certainly if we have the paper pencil option, we're going to utilize that.
Right,
So,
right.
Yes.
Which I believe is grades 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
But
I will-
we're gonna verify that here in the next second. But I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
Good, yay, okay. Okay, thought she might have been giving us the answer. Okay, so, on page 35, the language for iStation has been deleted for progress monitoring. Won't be using that for progress monitoring anymore. Section 3, English for speakers of other languages, there were no changes, just a link to their new handbook. Under Section 4, physical education, there was only one new change, and it was in House Bill 7069, and it was with regard to recess. So some language was added there, noting that each elementary school must provide 100 minutes per week of supervised, safe, unstructured free play. And it does have to be 20 consecutive minutes, and it does have to be in addition to the 150 minutes that are already required for PE. Okay?
Question real quick,
Yes, sir.
because you said it has to be 100 minutes per week, and it also says per day. So we're not given any levity that they could break it up into 2 days or something of that nature. It has to be 20 minutes each day.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
This, I actually double-checked at the state level because we had a couple of principals who were, rightly so, interested in kind of folding it under the umbrella of PE, and that was an absolute no. It's clear the statute wants it to be separate, unstructured, free play, and 20 minutes a day. Okay. Are we good? Okay. All right. So now the elementary student progression. Okay, so on page 42, this was exciting, right? The kindergarten report card has been revised, and it now
Why do we hear that sentence every year?
It now matches 1 through 5.
So the kids will get A through Fs
Yes.
in
Yes.
kindergarten.
Yes, there won't be any more ES and U.
And that's the result of the kindergarten report card committee, is that right?
Yes,
That is correct.
Okay.
that's what they wanted.
And
And how are they arriving at that grade? Is there some sort of standardized assessment that we're doing throughout the district, or is it teachers taking assignments on whatever grades taking grades on whichever assignments they happen to choose, like a first through fifth grade teacher would do? Maybe we'll invite
Ms. Cole.
Mrs. Cole on forward, because I bet the third grade portfolio will probably be
Yeah.
another topic if you're interested in
Another big one.
coming forward.
He's asking you to come forward.
Quietly
Yes.
exits the room.
Song playing in the background.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, kindergarten report card?
Yes.
What we did at the end of the year, because we always receive feedback throughout the year regarding, and the kindergarten report card does come up every year. But this year what we did was we had regional meetings so that we could have more kindergarten teachers be represented to get input. And this is what they recommended. This is what they wanted. We actually had someone from IT to present, who were present as well, who answered questions. So they wanted to mirror what first and fifth grade was doing, so we accommodated them. And it has been positively received. And we've had training on that professional development day so that they could actually input information and be trained on the new kindergarten report card. And I haven't heard anything. It's been extremely quiet,
Wow.
which makes me a little bit nervous, but it's been good. So I'm very positive, hopeful.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I had to read this multiple times and say, does this say what I think it says? I just, well, I can't imagine giving a kindergartner an F and how that would be received on the.
This is silly.
Well, and Mr. Dodd asked if they're gonna give, now with these assessments, are they gonna give the same assessment across all of our elementary schools, or are they gonna, is it up to the teacher what assessment they're choosing to give the kindergartner to determine the grade?
Some schools have common assessments. I mean, we're working with them on that. And some will have their little assessments that come with their core
Okay,
as well.
so it's a
I mean,
school-based.
we'll monitor it as we go through. But, you know, I understand your concern if a child gets an F. We also have concerns if a child gets a U. And, you know, but most parents will want to know specifically what my child is struggling with. And a lot of times when they have an E, they don't know what that means. But at least with the graded work that they receive, they can kind of see what they're struggling in. And we'll monitor it throughout the year and see how it goes. But
There's,
this is
yeah.
what they wanted.
There's no doubt that, you know, as a kindergarten teacher, all these parents would come in and I'd explain, go over the first quarter report card with them. They had no idea what any of that really meant. So that's true, and I suppose this does clarify that. But I guess for me, I've got a level of concern on what is the consistency across the district. If this kindergarten teacher is just going to take grades on a bunch of tear out workbook pages, from the reading text, and this one's given some assessment that they've come up with, and this other school's got these common assessments.
It is definitely always going to be a work in progress, typically because it's kindergarten,
Right.
and it always will be. What we're trying to do is address teacher concerns, parent concerns, and come up with the best tool to help them as they determine the needs of the students. And as I said, we will continue to work with them, our literacy coaches when it comes to our ELA and reading, as well as our CRT when it comes to the math or math coaches. And we'll continue to get feedback to ensure that our students are actually, what we want them to do is whatever grade they receive on their report card be a true reflection of their ability. So we can make great decisions for our kindergartners and our 5-year-olds.
Is the progress report document, is that now available in Skyward where they're not having to go in every semester and retype everything out? Has that been rectified? Yeah.
I suppose if they're doing the A through F, then that'd be no different than the 1 through 5 that they
But is it still standards-based?
That's the question. So, but the report card, the instruction or the assessment might be standards-based, but the report card itself isn't really truly
No, it's not.
So it's just
standards-based
gonna say
anymore.
reading, math,
Yeah.
science,
Yes.
not
Yes.
science, but reading, math.
But they'll still have their progress report. They'll still meet with parents, determine, they will still have their parent meetings and talk about where the students are, what standards they're mastering, what standards they're not. The report card itself will not reflect that, no.
Will the progress report?
Yeah, well, there is that still that, they still have the ability to use the progress report they had before if they want. They can still do the paper and pencil. We just tried to make it as simple and easy as possible for the teachers. But we'll keep an eye on it.
So this seems like stepping further away from the idea of a standards-based report card. That I understand a standards-based report card is incredibly complex with, you got all these standards listed and you have to figure out how many times a student has to master one in order to check it off and say, yes, you've mastered that standard. But, it's just surprising, that's all.
And then in the appendix A, it says report card grades, 85% mastery of standards in reading, language, arts, and math. So the student's gonna have to have an 85% in kindergarten to pass. So they have to have a B on their report card to pass kindergarten?
No, it means that 85%
of
there
the
are 100
standards.
standards, 85% of those standards have to be mastered. They master it based on the report card grade.
All right,
So no, they don't have to have a B in order to master. It's 85%.
of the standards. So they're still gonna have to document the passage of the
Yes,
standards and count
yes.
how many standards they've
Yes, that
passed and
hasn't
not. And
changed.
okay.
As we are looking for building the foundations in kindergarten, doing that, is there any oversight that if a child at the end of the grading period got an F, I would have certainly expected that teacher to be dealing with the parents or
Absolutely.
some narrative that says what we're working towards with that child. Just to get an F at kindergarten
No.
would be pretty intense, I would think.
Yes. There should be ongoing dialogue with the parents at every grade level, especially in kindergarten, because that's their start. So yes, anytime you have a student who is struggling, there should be that dialogue and that parent meeting to talk about the services that will be offered within the classroom as far as meeting the needs of the students. There's got to be those parent communications rather than waiting until they actually get either a progress report or a report card to show that you're failing.
Right.
So it has to be that ongoing dialogue. That is the expectation of every teacher in this district.
I just, for me, everything has to be age appropriate, and this grading just doesn't seem to me at kindergarten that we would apply the same as first through fifth grade. Just doesn't. I don't know. It's just, I've got a weird feeling about it. So.
Do you know
But
what
if the teachers want it, I'm good
What
with
was the discussion? I know you said they wanted to match first through fifth grade. Was it just for communication with parents because that piece was so difficult for them to
We heard
understand?
a lot of different communication from the teachers. Many of them felt that they were overburdened when it came to what their expectations were when it compared to first through fifth.
Right.
Many of them felt like the 3 times, the 3 times mastery was overwhelming. We changed that. Some of them felt like, at least with the numeric grade, and they still keep track of the standards and what they are mastering. It took a lot of time, so they want to make sure they get back to providing instruction and not spend the majority of their day just checking off a box. They want to provide the instruction. I'm sure you remember those days.
There is no doubt.
So we listened to them as they gave input and tried to still give them the ability to be able to track their students through mastery of their standards, but give them a tool at the end of the day that will not take so much time when you're giving the parent the picture of where their students are. So we were trying to find a happy medium there. So again, just like we do every year, we will progress monitor and see how it works and listen to parents as well as teachers and administrators of their school campuses on how well this is working or not working. And we'll adjust accordingly.
So,
But it's always a topic because I think it is the first time our children are in the public school system and they're getting graded for work.
so the 7 grades will apply to kindergarten. They'd have to have 7 grade assignments in order to.
That's a minimum.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a minimum
They can have.
in order to arrive at that.
Right.
I guess I'm just interested to see what teachers actually how they end up arriving at this grade and watching the variety of approaches.
And we'll have our first literacy coach meeting and CRT meeting in the middle of September, so we'll be able to get some feedback at that time on how things are going.
Yeah, 'cause I just know there's a variety of expectations when you look at kindergarten teachers, what they have of their students. And I know that some teachers have considerably higher expectations than others who, some teachers, they're content if, they can put some color on a page and call it a day, whereas others, I mean, they're looking for the reading at that point.
But I really do believe across the district, we've moved away from that particular expectation
Wow.
to a standards-based expectation
Sure.
of these students mastering those standards. The fact that our superintendent continue to use our academic tutors in kindergarten
Right.
and first grade, and they're being trained on phonics instruction and
Right.
providing that service and that support within the classroom, that they all know the importance of our students mastering and getting a great start as a kindergartner. Because if we don't perfect that, the student struggles rest of those years ahead of them.
Indeed.
The goal is when third grade comes around, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute,
That's right.
that we don't have to worry about what the state mandate is. Our kids will be ready. And we've seen amazing results assessment-wise when we look at our data. Still gonna be a work in progress.
So my last, and maybe it's more of a recommendation, and I know that you just talked about how we're being trained and so forth, but if we look at 85%, and I don't even what age I'm on at this point, but we talked about how 85% of the grades have to come from the standards of that current grade level. And then it gives a list of the different things that you can use to grade. Do you know what I'm talking about? What I'm looking at? Okay. So 85% of 7 is 6. So 6 of those 7 grades have to come from standards based on their level. And so I have a concern with some of the use, and the number one thing I can point out is accelerated reader, and I know I've had this conversation before, I get it, but I'm seeing more than one grade if it's 6 out of 7. And I know some teachers give way more than 7 grades, but I know some teachers that give 7 grades, period. So like utilizing accelerated reader, my favorite example to give is the kid that's in 2nd grade that's reading a 5th grade level book
Sure.
that gets a 75, and that goes in the grade book as a 75 on a 5th grade level text for 2nd grade. And then we have the opposite, where we have students reading kindergarten books in 2nd grade, scoring 100 and getting 100 in their book. And so I'm seeing it used a couple of different ways, but my fear, and I'm on board with kindergarten teachers being on board with it, I'm fine with you guys progress monitoring, I know this comes up every year. But my concern is we're moving away from standards-based progression. And so now I can just give my 7 grades, and we're not going to be as deliberate about making sure that they align to the standards. And so if we're looking at accelerated reader options, if we're looking at the way students are using that, is it their goal that they're meeting their points, or is it an actual percentage, which is what I see. The students average on those tests that they're taking, regardless of the grade that the book is determining that. The other thing, I'm going to get off my accelerated reader kick, but that's all. I just want to make sure that, and that voices the same concern. It's not just kindergarten, it's kindergarten through 5th grade, that the work that we're giving students is accurately a reflection of the standards at that grade levels.
Yeah, well, and I guess I'll succinctly say I'm not a fan of AR being graded, and
Sorry, I didn't mean to make this
no,
accelerated reader.
but I've seen it happen, and so I mean part of that goes back to how have we trained teachers to use accelerated reader and what are the appropriate appropriate usage of it. But I mean, could we throw in the progression plan here that some line that accelerated reader is not intended to be graded assignments?
I think that when it comes to that particular topic, we need to have a lot of dialogue, what the expectation is, and I think there may be, from my former principal hat, I know what my expectation was, but I think that we have to, if there are pockets out there, we can determine how accelerated reader is being used. I mean, we use it as setting goals because we want our kids to have a love for reading wherever they are and take them as far as they can go with that program, and that was initially assigned. When it comes to assigning grades for AR, even when I was in the classroom, and that was way back, obviously, if I read a book to a student, to the class, and we discussed it, that's very different from, in taking a grade. Because we read it together, we discussed it together, et cetera. So we'll find out where those pockets are, determine where that's happening and how is it being used. If I hear what you're saying is those, even if you just have a minimum of 7 grades, when it comes to ELA, we don't want 2/3 of those grades to be from AR. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So would you like me to throw in my 2 cents on
Go
this
for it.
topic?
You love AR.
Yeah, we know. Sure.
Yeah. No, I don't want that on the record. You know that I am not a fan of accelerated reader either, which is why I have said, and I will continue to say, that it is not to be used as a grade. It is strictly to help incentivize and promote a love of reading, which I'll debate that one too. But I know that this conversation in particular was really about teacher autonomy. This topic came up over and over again every single elementary session that I conducted with the teacher focus groups. It was on the top of their list that kindergarten teachers really felt like, again, that they were spending so much time trying to document that they just didn't have time to teach. And so I kind of put it back on them to come back to the table with some solutions to that. And I don't believe that they clearly could articulate and understood the standards-based approach. They get that kids are either meeting, they're exceeding, or they're below standard, and what that looks like. There was a lot more conversation about the observational piece of that. So much of kindergarten is not about a test grade or a workbook page, that it's about what the teacher observes or sits and listens to a child read and is able to understand whether or not they're reading on grade level or not. And so that gave me great hope that regardless of at the end of the day, whether it was an A or a S or an N or whatever it was, that was the communication piece. But what's happening in the classroom, I felt very comfortable that they really understood that this was about getting kids to meet and exceed the standard, and then what we do when they don't. So I share the concern about a kindergartner getting a D or an F and what message that sends, but the reality is that the U was sending the same message, but parents understood. And a lot of parents asked for this as well, just feeling like it brought some greater clarity to them. So I think the ongoing communication, the use of the progress monitoring tool that they have available, which is totally standards-based, and relying on that document and what the teacher knows about each child is going to be key to this. And like she says, we'll come back if it's not working, and we'll continue to work on this until we find something that teachers and parents feel is meeting the needs of the kids and the communication piece. So I'm not as concerned just because of the conversation and the quality, I think, of the instruction that they were able to share with me in those sessions. And the training will help with that. And I think we have some strong teacher leaders in kindergarten that can help to promote that idea. So.
Okay, yeah, don't go anywhere.
I'll stay.
So over on page 46, Ms. Cole added language to the portfolio option. And I believe that language directly addressed some parent concerns. And so I'll let you take a look at that and see if you have any questions.
Well, I guess I'll roll the dice and just kind of anticipate on this one that no matter what we put in here, we're still going to hear from parents about this one. You know, that 180 days should matter, yada, yada, yada. Totally agree, but the law is the law on this one. I guess the big thing that is probably going to be that's going to stand out is that the extra verbiage here about how the materials having been vetted and approved by the curriculum department. And I know that's not written into the Rule 6A here, but in reality, you've got to have some level of accountability that what the teacher is picking is actually valid or eligible to be used.
I think it's more for teacher-made tests.
Right.
You know, just ensuring that when you're having a teacher-made test, that it's a level of rigor that the expectation is. Just to have some, not stamp of approval, but just making sure, because we have different levels of experience out there when it comes to our teachers. It's not to say they aren't able to do this, but just to have another set of eyes on the assessment and to ensure that it's got the requirements of what the state says it has to when it comes to that assessment.
So in my eyes, like when I read this and when I think about the past conversations that we've had, I know you listed in here, and we've had this conversation about, it says such evidence could be selected from Florida's item bank and test platform chapter or unit test from the district school's adopted core reading program that are aligned with those. So you guys have already qualified which chapter and unit assessments would meet the standard for the portfolio, correct?
And many of those are in the item bank.
Okay.
Many of those are already there.
So
But
if
it
they,
doesn't have all of them.
Right.
Now it opens it up to
Right.
chapter tests.
so if this is my third grade class and I've got 22 kids in front of me, and I'm going to give the chapter 8 tests from the core reading curriculum, and they're going to take it independently, can I then take Mr. Matthias's as evidence that he passed the test and put it in a portfolio? He took it independently. It's a piece of documentation. If I have concerns, because down here it says we can we can ask at any point that we begin the portfolio. So if I'm suspecting, I don't know why I did you, I'm apologizing in advance. If I'm
I'm an easy part.
suspecting that Mr. Matthias could possibly score a level 1, and I know that chapter 3, chapter 5, and chapter 8 will meet these 3 standards, and I have 3 pieces of evidence, can I collect those tests that he took independently and passed as a part of his portfolio assessment?
Yes, ma'am.
So potentially at the end of the year, I could have a completed list of standards-based vetted pieces in the portfolio.
Yes, ma'am.
But would that matter, though, if questions on that test were about a story that was discussed in class? Because then you've had the benefit of discussion
And
around that
that's-
going into that test.
That's the discussion regarding the definition of independently
Right.
produced, because what we want is students to be able to, what we call co-read.
Right, right.
We've talked about this standard, we have practiced it, but okay, and here is a co-read, nobody's seen it before, you can read it, and here you have this chapter test. And that's where you have to, if you're looking at your book, pick and choose which ones you're going to actually do
Yeah.
and submit to your kids. Because there is a difference between
There is.
discussing it in class
That's right.
and taking your test.
But don't all of our
And
tests now, and please, I'm just assuming, don't all of our tests have a cold read portion
It
now?
should, yeah, we
Right,
have a
It should.
collection of co-reads.
And
for
so-
every kid.
And so that's the part that you could tear off and say,
Right.
yes, this
Yeah.
counts, but then the
Right.
first half of the test that
That
might have
they
been
go
about the
over.
story that
Right.
they've discussed and read about all week, and
Right.
then that part you would toss aside because they've had the benefit of discussion on that one.
Right.
But the cold read
Right.
is totally eligible.
Right,
Okay,
and the teachers know that,
okay,
they know that.
So this will take us away from an individual coming up and saying, my child was left behind, but I have all this documentation that shows that they should have been progressed and
I hope
put
so.
forward. Okay.
I hope so.
It gives them more options.
There are
I
more
mean,
options.
There are a lot of and this has been this has been a topic that I've lived with for a long time. It's one of my special places in my heart. There are so many assessments in the item banks, and I was wondering, why is there so much concern? But it gives more options out there. So if by some reason you run out of assessments, I can't imagine you still have these others, because there are just so many in there.
There are.
But you have the others. Now, the plus side of the item bank is that many of the assessments they've been chosen to put in there cover multiple standards, whereas a unit test may not necessarily do that. So you may end up with more of those type than you would need to. It just depends on which one's chosen. But we're hoping that will ease the nervousness or stress and have a clear picture for parents. At least give them a sense of calmness.
And if I could add, this was one of the topics too that was high on the radar as I entered into this position. And Dr. Weiskopf and I met with the parents who had concerns about the portfolio. And we sat down and we looked at state statute and we talked about what teachers wanted in regards to more options and flexibility for kids, again, to truly know which kids had mastered the standards or not. And so this language was actually the result of that conversation with those parents who felt like this was a great compromise. This was language that teachers wanted. So I think that I'm hopeful that this will resolve any of that confusion and just the angst of that. And this actually mirrors statute as well.
Okay. Hopeful, we're all hopeful. Okay. So on to middle grades progression. Well, all right, you can. Another result of House Bill 7069 is that we are no longer required to provide career and educational planning in 8th grade. And so on page 53, that language has been removed.
But because it's not required by statute, that seems pretty important. Why wouldn't we make a decision?
Actually, that is still used in middle grades progression.
Don't we do it somewhere? Did I see that? I didn't write down that because it wasn't a concern, but I thought I saw somewhere where they have to sign something. Is it 9th grade?
I'm not sure.
I'll find it. There was something about that.
But I was thinking middle school still does the culinary program, which is a career training.
Mm-hmm.
I just passed that. It's like in the book somewhere. I don't know.
I
It's a
think,
long
I think,
document.
I think
It
it's
is.
still, it just because you have your guidance counselors involved in educational planning as students are moving through the middle school and going into high school. And that this particular piece tied it into a social studies lesson.
My Career Shines is being used in high schools a lot for students to go on. That's our state site where they can go on and look at their progress, their interests, and different college options, career planning. That's a very nice
But
site.
this is our student progression plan. So I would say to you that eighth grade students should receive career and education planning instruction. That's just my opinion about it.
They do,
Through guidance and
just not through,
this particular method, this particular.
Hmm.
We'll check on it.
yeah.
So in other words, what we could do, rather than strike, or maybe strike this, but just say that even though it's not required, but we will make it available? Is that what you're asking for?
I don't know what I'm
I
asking
think we
for.
can
I'm
find
saying-
language, we'll find
fact we
language
struck
that
out this
will
whole section.
accommodate to ensure
Right.
that educational planning is taking place. Maybe not through this particular mode, but through. At least it will be, we can maybe find, some language we can state in there.
Yes.
Because isn't robotics also kind of like a career education? And they teach that in middle school. I mean, that's getting you into computers and different things, and to me, it's a form. It may not be classified, but it's a form.
Yes, I think we can add language about other for examples. But this piece took it out of, and if you look there at what's been taken out, there were kind of strict guidelines for what had to happen. And those pieces have been removed. But I agree, we should add some language back in for.
Yeah, I'm
for
not certain
supporting.
exactly what that looks like. But
Okay.
as that child is eighth grade and preparing to go into ninth grade, that's when they're beginning to make some decisions about which direction. And to not offer some type of instruction just seems,
Well, particularly because they have to make some decisions going into high school, whether they're interested in Health Sciences Academy or whether they're interested in any one of our other paths that we offer for accelerated opportunities or for CTE.
Right.
To get them in the right spot for that kind of thing.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay. Over on page 58 is kind of the next significant change. This is a change in the weighting of coursework versus semester exams. And it was decided on the committee and with some feedback from principals that the best thing to do is to make it consistent across middle and high school. So at some point, middle was 90%, 10%. And they thought it would be better if it kind of mirrors high school. So we are doing all 80%, 20%, with exception, of course, of the courses that have a required EOC exam, and those by statute have to be 30%. And then the wording was changed to take out the words final exams, because really, truly, per Skyward, there are no final exams. There are 2 semester exams. So that's just clarification. Any questions or concerns about that one? It was a big deal for a little while because it was inconsistent and changed. Some principals weren't sure how and why it changed, but I think everybody's on board with 80-20. Okay. That was easy. All right.
One question that
So close.
Hold on. No, it's an unrelated topic, only because I tend to receive a couple of these phone calls every year.
Okay.
And I guess I just want to know the answer to this. Referring to like music performances outside the school day for chorus or band, that kind of thing, and that it says some of them may be used for a grade. Every year I always hear from a parent that there's some big requirement that this kid, for whatever reason, can't go to one of the band concerts and is going to fail the semester or something. So it does say some of. What happens when there is a conflict like that?
My understanding, and I had conversations around this when it was an issue, because I was a parent who would say, you can't penalize my child for not being able to go to a concert on Saturday. Well, actually, they can. The language is very soft in here because some do and some don't. But they can. It's within their purview to say this is kind of like an assignment, because those things that they do at night or on the weekends, when students miss, it has a big impact on
Right.
their learning and the whole process. So they can, not all of them do. So the language is very soft, but it's really up to each individual band director or coach.
With that statement made, do we really think that's fair, that it would be up to the individual? It seems like we'd want to apply the same standard across the board. And I see penalizing or having that stick that you want them to show up for a concert. But on the other hand, if one gives an F and one's a little more free-spirited and goes, I understand.
Well, just make it the next one.
Yeah, make the next one. But should we not have it consistent?
And then also,
I mean, because then, I'm just saying, that just seemed really odd to me that we would just leave it up to the band director or drama, or whatever. It's not just band, I suppose.
Right, right.
No.
It's all sorts of
But all
theater.
sorts of things that happen on the weekends or off, but does that seem like it'd be that loose? I don't know.
It's that consistency struggle there, you know.
It
that
is.
Some folks will be very passionate about this program, saying, you know, you're gonna make a career out of theater. You need to be here at every single one of these things, and you know, you need to be as passionate about it as I am. On the other hand, you might have some folks who might recognize, all right, I understand that life is busy outside of school, and you can't make every single one of these performances, and that's where the sum of them will be included as a grade. But yeah, how do you level that playing field?
Well, I can do some individual research with curriculum, extracurricular folks at the high schools and kind of see where everybody lands, and I don't know, we're thinking maybe some guidelines or.
Well, I would definitely say we need a guideline, at least, so that if you are in Leesburg band and Eustis band, and they treat it completely different, then it seems like you'd want them to be on the same page.
But I don't think we even have the same requirements for the number of performances or the type of performances. So you might be at Leesburg and Eustis, and Eustis is gonna do 10 different things, and Leesburg's gonna do 2, and I don't know if that's the case. But then you're saying if you miss a performance, you're gonna drop a letter grade, but you're gonna miss 1 out of 10 here and 1 out of 2 here.
That's right.
And that's significant. I don't know. I'm listening to you guys, and I hear your concern, but I also know
It's hard to
that the-
standardize.
It is very hard to
standardize.
standardize.
And I think about and this is gonna be a really, just go with my analogy, I think about government, and like,
I
are
thought
we?
you were gonna put me in it.
No, figure that out, I'll figure out how to. Like, do we impose more, like, I'm always fearful of, like, even putting accelerated reader is not an option. It can be one of them if they have 6 out of 7, but I don't wanna say you cannot do this, or you must do this, because we do like to leave a level of independence up to the person that's in there. But it seems to me that if we're gonna leave independence up to the person to be there, that they need to be rational about it. So I can't say, I have 9 out of 10 performances and you're gonna fail my class, because you can't come tomorrow night.
Well, if you're first seat drummer,
Right, you
Then
need to
you
be
need
there.
to be there.
That's right.
And-
But how can you hold that kid to a
That's
lesser
right.
standard than the last place trumpet player at the end who
Thank
really
goodness I'm
kind of
not
sucks,
very
and
good
you're
at,
like,
like-
thank God he's not here, right?
All right, we're gonna
well,
have
maybe you do
room
that.
this
Maybe
week.
you fly that. It's weighted, because chances are if you're number one, that you're gonna probably be there
You are
because you're more
gonna be there.
passionate.
Well,
And,
but you've got a
Sorry.
wedding
So-
to go to that weekend. You know,
No,
there could be
no.
any number of, you know, so.
well, since I was in the band, that seat position
It's
is what you
important.
vie for.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that if you don't come, maybe
You
you
lose
lose
your
a seat,
seat.
rather than get an F or.
You
a
almost
D.
want to just go with the verbiage that you said, guideline, be rational about
That's-
this.
that's
You know,
it.
because in
Yeah.
reality,
Right.
you know, you need to be flexible and say, okay,
Because that works all the time, that whole be rational.
Yeah.
really that's what it comes down to. I mean, if you were
Besides,
rational, then this wouldn't be an issue. I wouldn't be getting those phone calls every year saying, my kid has to go to a wedding in Maine and it can't go because we've got the band performance this weekend. You know, and that's the kind of thing I'm trying to avoid. And then I'm like, well, you get up with the teacher and the principal, you know?
No, but the rational part of that may be, this is so important, they have to be there from the instructor's.
That's right.
That's right.
That's
And
right.
I mean, so we need to me,
Can we have just a word of caution when it comes to the leadership of that school, when you have your extracurricular leader how it affects attendance or not, looking at it very carefully and making good choices. Because you don't want a lack of attending a particular performance to cause a kid to fail a grade.
We would
You
hope
know,
that wouldn't
But
happen.
when we
But I
have what's
don't-
called a progression plan, that for me, it's a little more concise with what the plan is. If we're saying be rational or be this or that, it's like
I
loosey-goosey.
mean, I know, but I'm just I'm struggling with the word and verbiage and how that's gonna look. Because you do have so many different ways that those
Well,
extracurricular
how about as
activities-
simple as, if you do not show up for an event that's outside of the normal school day, that you may lose your seat, whatever that position is.
That's not chorus either. And chorus doesn't have seats.
Chorus doesn't have seats?
Drama
Here,
doesn't have
no.
seats. You're gonna lose your part, but then you've got 6 months of rehearsals. You can't just put somebody in that part. Like, it's, that work for
That's gonna
band.
be enough.
Okay, that's all I'm worried about is band right now. We'll take on the others as it
All
comes.
right, thanks so much.
Well, this
Okay.
goes back to the standards-based question, because grades are to reflect the standards.
Yes, right.
So is there a standard for chorus or band that says that you have to attend a particular performance in order to get a grade or not? And so I pulled up the core standards for band, high school band 1. And it talks about perform independently and accurately, melodies by ear. So if I'm evaluating that standard, I might do it at a performance, but I also need to make sure that I give that student the opportunity to perform in my class as an alternative, because I'm grading the standard, not whether or not they attend an event. So that's that message that we just have to keep drilling, that it's about the standards, not about being a punitive system. You know, it goes back to the elementary where kids used to get extra credit for bringing in Kleenex. You know, remember,
That's right.
you know,
Yes.
you know,
Used to.
and what standard does that go with? Not real sure. So those are those old practices that we've got some mindsets to change, but.
But I was thinking on it also in that way, that there would be another alternative for them to be able to get their grade, because you've got, as you say, the first chair drummer or trumpet player, and happens to be also the starting pitcher or the center of the basketball team, and they've went beyond their normal season, but you had this planned months ahead, but they went beyond their season, and this is the championship game. So do you punish them for going to the basketball game, or do you say,
It's a
well,
true
we'll work
story
out?
that happened to me my junior year of high school. He is, I thought you were gonna say center field on the softball team.
Well, I didn't
had
wanna go
pick
there.
Between the two
Yes.
events.
Which one did you pick?
Well, the state event was a solo event, and so I chose to forego the solo event and played the softball
She
team
played softball game.
because that was a team. But had my grade been weighted on that performance in the solo competition, then I would have
Still be
forfeited.
in-
and
Which,
I
by
was
the
still
way,
in
she
first
was a
chair.
very good trumpet player.
Was,
I said was.
I know. Just saying.
But I'm just saying, it's things like that that come into play with this.
It does.
And where do you draw the line? And I think she's kind of settled it there, that you give them the opportunity to do their performance away from that. But, you know, it's something that students have to make a choice.
Well, I think
And it's
that-
hard.
I think that the superintendent, what you just shared about it being standard-based, and that's a decision we make. Because I will tell you that a child we shouldn't put it on the child. If their parents have said, you've got to go to this, to Maine, then why put the additional pressure that we're now going to take a letter grade?
And penalize the
And
student.
penalize the student.
Right.
So I will guarantee you that based on what you said, because you said team a minute ago, that you came out because it was your team. And that's what inspires. If you're in the band, you play because of that leadership and that you want to be part of that collective group. And so maybe if we take the punitive part away and let it become more about inspiring them to be there, I think I'd be keener about that.
Well, at the same time, I guess you might have a band of 100 students and 10 might be inspired that night of the performance. So you've got to have some
This is going to be a really short performance.
to get them to show up. But at the same time, I like that you look at the flexibility and understand that at some point, life is just, it is what it is, and you're not going to get every student there every single night.
It's like you just want to say, be
That's right.
reasonable.
That's right. That's exactly what it comes back to for me. So
Be reasonable that it
That is a
doesn't come back
terrible
before the
plan.
board.
I guess with that assumption, then the language in here is fine, and I mean, as long as the principals have the direction that they've got to
And
see
I-
the other side of it sometimes.
maybe we can draft like a caution or a note or, that rather than being punitive for missing outside performances, students can be offered other opportunities to meet that standard.
Or maybe that's a discussion that you have at the high schools, yeah.
Again, maybe this is something you go back and ask those coaches and band directors and drama people, get some input from them, and come back with some recommendation. I don't want to sit here and preach from the bench, but
Okay, will do.
What's that word? To be drawn into court.
So, yes, we did that one. Okay, so we're over in high school. Progression. This was very exciting, starting on page 66. The graduation flyers from DOE. Now students entering 2014, 2015, and forward, all of those requirements for each year are the same.
Oh, praise God.
Wow.
That was really enthusiastic. So thank you. Because I was really excited
I was
about
really
that.
excited when I saw delete. We don't have to go back
Yes.
15 years and see different requirements for every cohort.
Yes,
Oh, my
so you'll see other plans will be deleted all the way down to 13, 14, because
Oh.
the common one starts in 14, 15. Okay. On page 76, there was a new program put out by DOE this year, the Florida Seal of Biliteracy. Yes.
Is it retroactive?
Yeah, that's awesome.
No.
I want to mind it.
Did you want to apply? I
Yeah.
can probably get you a sticker, but, so this special designation has to do with earning 4 credits in one foreign language. And the silver versus gold is based on your GPA in only the language courses. And then the seal it's actually quite a nice seal is placed on the student's diploma if they earn it. Okay, so all that's outlined there. Okay, on page 80, again, House Bill 69 added an option. They're loosening up what can qualify for meeting the online requirement, and so they've added a piece officially about blending learning. We always allowed that, but it's now official in the legislature, so any kind of a blended learning class can meet that requirement for online learning.
Do we have some sort of comprehensive list at the district level that says which of our courses or which sections in various schools qualify to meet that requirement?
Well, it would be the answer is no, but
Okay.
it would be any virtual course that you take, any course that has any online component. So it would be hard, I would think, to create a list, because you can have it in middle school as long as it's for high school credit.
Right.
But no, we don't. I could see if that'd be possible.
I don't know what questions the high school students are asking yet. I only have a middle schooler. but come that day, then as a parent, I'm going to wonder, does this course fulfill your requirement? Does this one? Does this one? Does this one?
The counselors are well aware, and they've been considering
Okay.
blended learning for a while now. It's official,
Sure.
but
Okay.
I think we're okay. Let me know when your child gets to high school. So I'm on page 98. Again, there's lots of wording changes you see in here, but a lot of it has to do with MTSS, progress monitoring, Lake Tech dual enrollment. They had some of their information that they wanted to reword a little bit. And so then over on 98 are updated charts again in terms of scores for standardized testing. And the major component from 7069 on this one was that the requirement for Algebra 2 EOC has been removed.
I noticed that there weren't, and it just says concordance scores, there weren't, the concordance scores, are they coming out for like the ACT? It just said the PERT, right, or the concordance, was it PERT, or maybe?
It was PERT. I would have to check with Paula Wicker.
Okay, I just
O'Barry.
wondered if they were gonna come out with a concordance score with the ACT like we used to have as well, or are they not gonna touch that? We don't know yet.
We just don't hear about ACT. I'm not sure why. they're not using it for concordance.
I think so. I mean, I do too. I don't know.
Did the ACT take the place of the first?
Is the ACT taking the place of the PERT?
The ACT is always been an option.
Right.
But it's now the
SAT, ACT, there is no alternative for PERT once it goes away. It's just SAT and ACT, that's concordant.
But that's, I didn't mean alternative, it just replaced it. So you didn't have three choices, now you have two.
Correct, correct.
But there wasn't a score listed. Is that just because they're not updated yet? For this year?
For,
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the page.
for the ACT
I may have wrote
concordance
it down.
score?
Yeah, yes, yes, ma'am.
It hasn't changed, that was the one I think that was still up for negotiations.
Okay, because there's a table in here, and I gotta find it, and it's got all the concordance scores. These are the 17, 18, right here. Grade 9 math requirement. It's on page 120, and it tells you passing score, PERT math concordance score, ACT and SAT says NA, and it says NA for 16, 17, 15, 16, 14, 15,
All the way
13,
to
14, all the way
2010.
down to 2010, and I know we have a concordant score.
Well, I will double check that with testing. These are their
Okay.
tables, and
All right.
I will
Perfect.
certainly double check.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because we have a concordance score for ELA, but not math.
Otherwise, why would we change grade?
Right. That's why I thought, did this go away? But then I saw the past year, so I was like, okay, something's off.
Check the charts. Then the last two sections, well, they're not the last two, but the next two, Florida Bright Futures and the partial waiver of child labor law, there were no changes in those sections. And then our final section is exceptional student education. There were some wording updates, but primarily on page 113 is the table that walks through the options for diplomas. And you can see that there were some minor changes there. Okay. I don't know if we want to take a few minutes to do this. I don't know how we're doing on time. No, it's-
Keep going.
I'll at least
I think
just
so. The
throw.
rest of it is Tom, so I'm not sure how much time you need for your.
If you take a break, longer. If you don't take a break, it'll go quicker.
I think we're okay on time.
Okay.
The eclipse is at what, 119? That's what everybody in the audience is keeping track of. So.
Close to 3.
So, this year, we had some questions from Mr. Klatt. The concern from teachers is how do we handle student grades when they come to us either from home education and they don't have any grades, or come very late in the year and we can't get records from a previous private school or whatever the situation is. So I wanted to share that in the student progression right now, there are multiple options, and I didn't even list them all here. But so, for example, if there's adequate time, they should have the opportunity to make up any work that could equal those grades. In high school, you can place the student in the correct sequence per their age. So you could put them, for example, in English 3 if the student is saying, I should be in English 3. And if they pass with a C or better, then they would get credit for English 2 and English 1. That's an option in high school. Teachers may use grades earned while the student is attending our schools and then duplicate those grades for previous marking periods so that Skyward can calculate a grade. In elementary, you can just put in pass fails. Then Skyward will not calculate a grade, but I think that the thinking is for elementary school, it's probably not very, very important that we have a final grade as long as it's a pass. And then to address all of these concerns, 3 years ago, our IT department added a comments box in Skyward for those situations where teachers make certain decisions about how they want to do that, and they can comment in the box, for example, these grades were not earned under my direction of teaching. They were duplicated in order to create a final grade. But anything that they want to put in that comment box to assure that they're responsible for only the grades they want to be responsible for is kind of how we addressed this 3 years ago. But it came back again, and there was still some more discussion about how we should handle that. So I really just wanted to throw it out and see if you all had any feedback or any thoughts or ideas. And I don't know if Mr. Klatt is here. Oh, you are. I don't know if you want to elaborate on any of that.
Let me ask a question, and then maybe he might want to elaborate. That I cannot imagine that if a child is coming from a private school, or even if they've been homeschooled, they have to reach certain standards. So why would we have someone coming in that they don't have their records?
Well, I guess you'd be surprised, but private schools sometimes just refuse to send their records. And if they come from home ed, and the parent says, I have this evaluation from last year, that's all that's required by the law, is a one-time-a-year evaluation. That doesn't translate into grades necessarily.
So is this, we have local private schools that have not shared information?
On occasion.
Okay.
It should be rare, and I believe it is rare, okay? But when it happens, it's very important to teachers that they want to be doing the right things.
sure.
So,
By both the student and them.
yes.
So, okay, so this takes care of that, Stuart? It doesn't?
All right, come on down if you would, please.
Okay, you have a couple of situations, and I'll talk personally. When I was teaching TV, I would get a student who transferred in. They didn't have any openings. They put them in my TV class the last grading period and expected me to go back and create grades for the first 3 grading periods. That's one scenario. Another scenario is truly the kid who comes in with no record and they're being told to duplicate grades, but the teachers are saying they didn't earn the grade under my watch. So then it becomes a potential ethics concern that we're falsifying the student record.
Why is it necessary to go back? Am I missing something?
It had to do with the something in Skyward and
Yes.
I think that-
Calculate.
I think that we did find a
You
solution.
can't calculate something, when you're doing a calculation, you gotta calculate something.
Okay, but on the other hand, you can't expect just to arbitrarily give a grade either. So that seems
That's
odd to me that we're asking that to be done.
I thought you'd come up with a solution for that. I don't recall that specifically, but I know we've been talking about that because I agree. I certainly don't want teachers to be making up grades or taking just erroneous grade just for the sake of a calculation in Skyward. So I'm not sure where we are with that or if we've come to any resolution, but I know.
So if I come to Leesburg High School and I've been homeschooled and I'm now, what's the last quarter is what we're worried about, right? Last quarter.
Generally.
Yeah, okay. How do you know even what classes to put me in if we don't have any idea of the student's achievement or ability?
I would say it happens less at high school. Usually they have something at high school, and there's a uniform transfer of credits that's in the law that kind of outlines how we can do it at high school. And sequencing is one of the things in
Okay, but
universal.
the example you use, because you were at Lake
Because
Mineola.
sometimes at the
High
high
school.
school level, it's who has an opening,
Who has space
which
in the
class
classroom?
has space.
Yeah, it is.
And this class would have been so unique that they likely would not have had that at another
Right.
school, so there's nothing that you could possibly transfer in.
Exactly.
So now when it gets time to compute this kid's final grade or the semester grade, he's only got the 1 quarter. And Skyward is having trouble computing that because it doesn't have 3 other quarters to look at. Is that-
You can do where it does do a calculation, or you can do where it doesn't calculate, so that those are the two
Well-
options.
Well, I don't even see how a specialty program like what you were teaching, Stuart, you could bring somebody in the last quarter and expect them to be competent. that's like, I mean, that's
That
like
was my
silly.
That's one
argument,
question.
but-
That's silly to me anyway.
That
But-
was my
but-
argument,
But the reality is, okay, so if it's not high school, then is it middle school? that
It's
we're really
mostly
talking
elementary.
Elementary.
Mostly elementary school.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we not do some kind of assessment of the child?
They can, that's one of the options that they can do, sure. But
And-
again, assessment doesn't necessarily translate into a grade on a report card.
But in order to take that child, regardless, I think almost any grade, that you've got to know their abilities.
Right.
And so if you're going to plug them in the fourth quarter, they had better be up to standard, right?
Yes. I
To be
would-
whatever class they're in, I don't know.
Yes.
Some might be, some not.
So in terms of the grade, what we did this past year, as the school year ended and when this case came up, I recommended that they give the child an I, which is so that you've got something in the field in terms of the calculations for Skyward, and then make a note in the comment section that there was insufficient grades in order to generate a final grade. But it was based on, then the teacher would already have probably identified whether the child was eligible for promotion or not. But what we didn't want was just a random report card
Right.
grade, so we just put an I in the field.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So what's the problem with that?
There
was
wasn't
no
a problem.
with that.
Well, Jimmy
This is
Christmas,
talking
this is do
about
that.
The
Okay.
number, the fourth bullet point talks about just duplicating grades. Now, see, that makes sense, and that's what I told teachers.
I'm digging the I part, because that's honest.
But there won't be any final grade.
Yeah, that was specific to elementary that, yeah.
It's just, I don't know. It's
And-
a high school issue, so if you think about like a kid coming in
Thought
third
it wasn't a high
quarter,
school
who's
So it'd be on record. So it'd be on record.
Okay, but if you're coming in from high school, surely you have transcripts you're bringing with you.
well, but if your schedule's different,
Yep,
so if you're coming from a different state and your schedule's different and you get into a course in third quarter, you can't get a final GPA, and we all know if you've had high school, it's a big dang deal to have a GPA.
Right.
So, I guess my concern is, if I got a 92 in third quarter here, or in fourth quarter, and I don't have a third quarter grade, and I need a semester grade to do a GPA, right? What is the difference in me having a 92 in fourth quarter, or having a 92 in third and fourth quarter? If I just duplicate it, I know you didn't teach me, but I need the GPA to reflect at least what I did for you, which would be 92. Do you see what I mean? So, the duplication comes in when you need a final GPA, and we've had a couple cases in high school, but it does require a teacher to say that they got a grade for 9 weeks that they didn't teach them. But if it's the same average. I mean, it's not like I arbitrarily picked 80,
But
right?
what-
I'm just
but-
duplicating the same average so that I can actually get a final GPA.
But what is wrong with it showing an I rather than have this fake 92?
Then it doesn't
Skyward
compute.
won't compute a semester grade for me.
So you can't calculate.
I have to have a number in there to get a final GPA. So,
Can't
so
you write a
it creates a
program
real
where it'll-
issue for kids.
Mark says all eyes equal 92.
Yeah.
All eyes are 100.
So I guess, for me, it's a balance between the child needs a GPA, and it's not their fault they've moved into a course that either didn't reciprocate, maybe it's a different English class, it's a different course that they got placed in fourth quarter, so they can't get a record that transfers. It wasn't English 1 to English 1, from, California to Florida. It's a different kind of scenario to where they need a third grade or a third quarter, or they need a first and a second. Maybe they moved in second quarter, they don't have a first quarter. I still have to have, it's the semester grade that gives me a GPA, and I can't get a semester grade unless I have 2 quarters of grades. So, in Skyward, it's a Skyward glitch. We have a system that won't do it. So we can't penalize a child by not allowing them a GPA.
Well, if there's an upside to Common Core, I thought the idea was, regardless of where you're coming from, that the standards are the same. So an English 1 would be an English 1. And-
Right, but if I come here and I don't get into, and typically those courses aren't the ones that we're talking about, or if we don't have a record, it's a different kind of course that it happens with. Like, I come here and I have world history, but I was taking U.S. history there. I don't have the same schedule, so I can't get into the same course. and the grades aren't transferring. Or the grades come over and it's even the end of, I don't know another scenario, but sometimes, we've had a couple this year, it was very odd, and it has been kind of a problem, which I think is why Chris is bringing it up. Because I see the teacher side, and then I see the student side, and then I see the idea that it's a district glitch that's causing the challenge that we just can't fix because of the system, right, Creed? Would that be accurate?
But I cannot believe
So-
that we can't fix a computer program. Seriously.
That's
If
what
it's-
I
if-
said, Bill, but it's,
Well, let's
I'm
try
telling you, we can't get it fixed.
So absent of
And I
fixing
didn't
the
mean to butt
program.
in, but I wanted to make sure you understood the high school student side of this. It
I
does
said we
have
locked down high
implications for
school.
the
You
students.
can't transfer in.
So
We
absent
closed
of
our
fixing the
border.
computer program, then couldn't the report card comment fix or explain that, though?
Exactly, so if it's, well, where we've had trouble is if a teacher would put in the same average, because that'll give us a GPA, and put a comment that says, based on a duplicate, you know what I mean, they can
Right,
actually
that it
describe
explains that
it.
it's a duplicated grade based
Yeah.
on the
On the idea that I didn't have grades, to be able to compute a semester GPA, it would at least give the teacher some feeling of assurance that they weren't falsifying anything, that they could explain that, you know? Or it would be great if that was actually an option, like a, you know, which now I'm creating Skyward,
But as a-
drop down and like say, you know?
As a 4-year Skyward fan, not, and I actually have not complained in like a year, so which is pretty impressive. But now I guess I'm gonna complain, because I cannot believe that we would have to go through all this rigmarole when,
An I has no mathematical value.
yeah, well, maybe it's not, whatever will let Skyward do its thing, then that's what we need to figure out. If it has an I, then at equals, use it, no, then it goes to the value ahead, or something like that.
Now, the I was only the solution for
That-
elementary.
No, but if I
And
equals
then
the grade, fourth quarter grade, then it would compute, right?
But that would be the same, that's the same as
That's-
duplication.
But but at least it has fidelity. You are showing it as an I. The computer is,
Yeah.
But then you're also saying the student has mastered the standards that were taught during that period.
no,
It
no.
wouldn't if there's a comment or an I see what you're saying, Bill, like if it says
The comment's
I.
gotta
and-
explain what it means.
Mhm.
I think we've gotta think about that the student they need the GPA and it's caused a rub, right? I mean, Stuart,
Yeah.
I mean, it's between, cause a principal can actually, it's a lot of,
Headache.
Consternation.
so we at least had 2 or 3.
Well, is there a situation where a student, I just can't imagine you can't get transcripts. That's the part that's throwing me off. And I
Yeah,
guess,
but I'm telling you, you can't.
okay. So I believe. But
At least
would
in the
you?
very few cases
World,
you
that would
can.
be
But
true,
could you hypothetically leave and you were not doing well, transfer into here, knowing that you have to you're gonna ramp up,
Yeah.
so you end up with a higher GPA than you would have at your home school, or the school you came
You
from?
absolutely, and we would have no way to know that,
That's
right?
right.
So you absolutely, yes, but I guess my thing is, if I've taught you for 9 weeks and I see that your aptitude is this, then if I had taught you, I could make some kind of assumption that it would have been the same for 18. I'm not saying raise it or lower it, I'm just saying if you can have that duplication option with a comment.
You basically
then
made it
gives-
neutral.
It's a neutral, yeah, you're just saying it was 18, it's the same, because the average is still, I'm not saying you're a better student, I'm just saying from what I see, it's the same, just so the student can get the GPA,
Yep.
so they can get the
I
semester.
I think, did you understand what I
So-
was saying though, Creed? That I would equal your fourth quarter grade, hence it would have a numerical
I don't know
value.
if you could do that.
Because I think what you would end up there with is, it would be individually, because I may have a 94, you got a 92, so you got to input that I as a 94 for me and a 92 for them, unless you
That's-
come up with
It's
a.
fine, it's fair.
And then Stephanie
Well, I know, but I'm
genuinely
just
got an
saying,
I.
it creates a
She didn't do
little
all
bit
her
more
work, and
havoc.
So then fourth quarter, she says, oh, I cranked out a 92. Well, I'm not gonna go back and do the third quarter work. I'm just gonna let that 92 stand for the
Oh,
fifth.
Well, and
oh.
I'm not sure it'll do it either, because if an I would do that, then a nothing would do that.
No,
Like then it- like a no
Within,
grade.
within code, the I would have to have something to equal. It has to be numerical. So, I mean, you can do Excel spreadsheets that give you, a value.
For a number,
For
for
a
a
number.
variable.
It's gotta be a number, for sure.
Because really what I was just saying is, when,
But-
not
but-
I like your eye, but what I was
But
saying.
do we issue Is to where I think you were coming from? Do we issue incompletes
We do,
in other scenarios?
yes. That's what they're saying.
So
that would
if
be-
I did not turn my homework in,
You can get
and I
it.
get an I, now I'm gonna get the benefit of the grade.
Right,
And so
That's what
then
Stephanie
Like
applies
he
was
to
just
saying.
said, if I got an
that
I,
scenario.
Unintended consequences.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I am pulling from the comments on the report card to explain what that means.
so what we
And
were,
give them the 92, the other grade? 92, 90?
I mean, first choice, I'd say I'd love
I-
to be able
see,
to
I
get
can't do
Skyward
that.
to ignore the I and just average the remaining grades.
It's only
But
one
it-
grade.
But it's no difference than.
Well, it's
than
fine
you
with me.
think.
what it won't do is it won't give us a report if you have nothing in third quarter and you have a 92, for the sake of a better number, in fourth quarter. It won't just put 92 in semester grade. It won't do it. Like it will not do it. That's what I said. Just stick the 92 over here and don't let the teachers have to do anything. It doesn't do it. So something has to go into third quarter, and that's why we either duplicate or something has to go. You have to put a number in there, and you can't just arbitrarily pick a number. So my thing is, why wouldn't you just put the same number? But then there is this, then teachers brought up the idea that I'm not going to falsify a record. And my thing was, you gotta put then let's say why we're putting it in there for the computation of the semester grade, you know? It's-
But to Mark's comment a minute ago, if it's multiple tests,
Well, you have the semester exam also
That's it.
in high
That's-
school,
that's
plus
what
the
he
fourth
told me
quarter.
back
So it
then.
has two grades to average.
could you not move one of them over to the third column?
No, because then you still have a blank on the last column.
But see, on the semester
No, you said
exam,
you have two tests. The one test goes in the third, and the final goes in the fourth?
Well, it wouldn't just be a test, because it had to be a whole quarter's worth of grades.
Yeah.
So it's your final grade for that quarter that they
Never
would.
mind. Okay.
but in the fourth period, you're gonna have that, and then the semester, and the semester's gonna cover the third, and you're not gonna have any knowledge of that.
yeah, but if you look at the second bullet, it says in high school, a student may be placed in the correct sequence if they pass this course, they pass with a C or better, they can receive a pass fail. I'm thinking, that's not what I was looking at, but if they took the final exam or the end of semester exam and they pass it, then can you assume that they knew the first semester or the first 9 weeks part of that semester? They're not going to pass a semester exam without having knowledge of the first 9 weeks
You have to put
material.
something in third quarter.
So-
No matter what, a number has to go in the
Well,
box,
that
right?
validates that you belonged in that course, but it doesn't validate getting you the GPA that you need on your transcript. So
I have a question for
Say it.
Mr. Johnson.
So, I just wanna
Is this-
add that.
Can it be a M instead of an I? Like, no, seriously. So,
No, I get what you're saying. So it doesn't do all the I's the same way.
an M is that you moved.
So I truly get an I, and some other variable is where it computes the fourth 9 weeks and the third 9 weeks,
We,
right?
we don't have another variable.
There's 26.
I know, think out of the box, Creed. We're out there now. We're writing code for you.
We are.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
a question for Mr. Johnson, in regards to the teachers on the ethics on this, is this something that they're not gonna get something back on them?
I think that you want to do this, you just pass a policy that says in this situation, you're gonna put that grade in there, and then you direct IT to put the grade in.
We have a policy to do that?
No,
You would create a policy.
Create a policy, that way it protects the teacher.
it protects the teacher. They can follow policy.
That way, the other thing is, if the attorney tells us to do that and we do it, then it's not on us, it's on him.
Okay, I am not up for another policy on, that we're gonna duplicate a grade, blah, 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 put a comment. When I certainly still believe that we need to wait until we have Dr. Wheeler look at some options. M or I?
I like S.
What's S mean?
Well, we don't,
Or Sandy.
Okay,
Sorry.
so our first choice is get Skyward to work it, but I guess, if Skyward can't do it, then,
We can review
No,
options.
but if we already have an I in the system, and what does the I do right this minute?
It stands for.
I know what it stands for, but how is it computing?
it doesn't compute.
That's the problem.
Okay,
There's no
so,
computation. It has has no numerical value.
But it would have, but it would have to
Same as
stand
a zero.
for something different for every student.
Not every student. You
Every
only have
student
two
has an eye.
scenarios. No, that's right. Every student has an eye. But I'm saying that we have a different class of student that is that student
There's
coming
this.
in. And so it's not gonna be an I, it's gonna be an M or whatever letter. And that it then, so the I would not compute. And then, so if I didn't turn my homework in and I got an I in the third quarter and I got a 92 in the fourth quarter, then I have to get my homework in order to get a grade to get my GPA. In this case, an M would duplicate the fourth quarter. That's all I'm saying. It automatically would do it, where an I, you'd have to enter something in order to change it.
We'll see what options we have. I mean, right now, an M is not available.
Do we come up with the letters, right? Because at kindergarten, we were able to come up with E, S, N, and U, and so now that we took those off,
We saved those. We've got them in a bank.
that's right.
A letter bank.
You got extra letters now.
Put an N for needs a grade.
We'll see what our options are.
Or
Okay.
D for duplicate.
No.
Oh, we already used D?
60 to
Oh,
69.
never mind.
So, we'll,
Okay.
Is that all your presentation?
yes, sir.
All right.
I have a question then. I didn't read it in this policy, but a high schooler, say, doesn't get a 2.0 grade point average, and they're in a extracurricular activity other than sports, but yet they're not allowed to participate because they didn't get a 2.0. Talking about like ag. Say they want to show a pig, and now they can't show a pig because they don't have a 2.0.
I thought that we fixed that with Mr. Hogan.
But this is not
That-
athletic.
But it needs to be the same, because athletics falls under extracurricular, is the way he explained it to me, that it should be the same. If they're penalized in one arena, they should be penalized or not
Is that code of conduct?
consistently.
Or what, are we?
Are you saying you want to show the pig if you got less than 2.0?
It's an incentive for that student to get their grade, but if they get their 2.0, say in the first 9 weeks or the semester, and that's not until the second semester that would happen, but they're still not allowed that whole year to participate,
The
is
whole,
what?
okay, let me get
The whole
clear.
year?
The whole year.
Clarification. Is that what it says in?
Well, no,
sorry.
no.
Oh,
This is an
That's-
individual school that has taken this on, I think, but it involves a student. And so I want to know if it's policy all the way across the county in the high schools, or is it just this one school? Because to me, that's an incentive to try to get that student to get their grade point average up, to want to show that pig or that steer.
That's right.
okay. I'll find out.
The people with all the answers in the crowd.
I know
All
it.
mouthing answers to me, and I'm.
Tell them they're on camera.
So what is it?
Yeah, someone have one?
Does someone have an answer?
Francis.
I have an assessment answer. An assessment answer? The 17, 18, 18.
Francis has the pig answer, though.
I'm working on the big answer.
Oh,
Come
okay.
to the mic.
Well, she's still working on it.
Yeah, but we want everything on mic, so I can listen to it later in case I forget.
So I'm working on the answer. It's an extracurricular activity, so if they end up with a 2.0 at semester, just like athletics, you can be eligible at semester for athletics. If you get the 2.0 at semester when all the GPAs are calculated, reference previous conversation, then that person should be eligible. The problem with raising a pig is it takes the entire school year to do. You can't just raise a pig in the second semester. So part of the conversations I want to have with the different FFA teachers and the organizations is kind of that contract. So, all right, he doesn't have the 2.0 right now, starting in the fall. Let's do a contract so that he can raise his pig, but the kid and the family, everyone would know that if by second semester he doesn't have a 2.0, the pig's not going to the fair.
Agreeable.
Because he
Going to the
doesn't
cafeteria.
bring, right? Then we just eat bacon. But then, I mean, the kid, everyone's clear that the 2.0 GPA has to be satisfied by the second semester, just like all of our other activities.
Right, I have no problem with that.
So that's what I'm looking at getting in.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for looking into that. And do you have a assessment answer question?
Yeah.
Assessment question answer.
You asked about the assessments are paper-based or computer-based. So the House Bill 7069 says they have to be paper-based by 1819, but 1718, it is still computer-based for reading and math for 4 through 8, 4 through 10, and then, but third grade is paper.
Third
So-
grade is paper?
Third grade
Least
is paper.
For math and reading.
Yes.
Because it says reading and, it says reading's paper-based in here for third grade, but it says math is computer-based for third grade.
I wrote it down. I tried to text
Yes.
Diane, but she won't. So I couldn't.
During our meeting?
Oh, we're texting during.
Paper-based for ELA and math for grades 3 to 6 in the 18-19 school year, but 17-18 is paper-based for third, computer-based 4 through 10 ELA and math.
Okay, so that is a switch, at least.
So yes, the table needs updates still.
Does that help?
All right. Thanks so much.
Can I ask a couple more questions? It was just clarifying questions. It's not anything big, but there's, the grades required for middle school, for elementary, middle, and high school, I had the page numbers and the numbers to look at. They're just worded differently. So the elementary one on page 43 says that you must have 7 grades per 9 weeks. The middle school one says you need to record a grade for every subject for every week in the period. And the high school one says you need 9 grades. Like, if we know we're having 9 weeks, can we just say you're gonna need 9 grades? Like, I don't know why it's different in the middle school one than the other ones.
I do not either, just changing the
Yeah.
language
Right,
over the
there
years.
was a lot of
but
repetition, I will tell you, there's,
I will get with Ms. Cole, if there's
Okay.
no reason why that can't
Okay.
look exactly the same, then we
Okay.
will do that, yeah.
do we have, and this may be a different question, but summer dates, the PERT is the test our students take to get into advanced placement, correct? Advanced placement courses, what tests do they take to have to test into for advanced placement? The college requires it.
Oh, for
That would
dual
be PERT.
enrollment.
That's the PERT.
For dual, sorry, yes,
enrollment.
sorry, dual enrollment, that was
Dual
what I meant
enrollment,
to say.
yes, that's correct.
So when I was looking at the dates of the assessment for the PERT, post-secondary readiness test, sorry, thank you. I see you've got October, March 12th through the 15th, and July 9th through the 12th. So that's our summer date. Is that July 9th through the 12th? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and then that's for the reading and writing and math, and then it says PERT math, who haven't taken that, they have an alternate time, but not over the summer.
Paula Wicker arranges all of that.
Okay.
And in the past, from time to time, she has opened another window.
That was what my question was going to be. So if they miss that because they're unaware of it, they just need to get in touch with assessment and accountability, and they open a window for them to go and take that assessment board.
That's my understanding, yes.
Perfect, okay. And, hold on, are we using, this is maybe more you, are we using the iReady beginning of the year assessment and the end of the year as part of the growth model for the teacher evaluation? Is that why we're doing beginning, middle, progress monitoring with iReady?
Yeah, we have not changed in regards to, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought, I just wanted to double check. Okay. Oh, last question. The percent on the back, sorry, it's on, this is just a quick question. It's in the table, section page 123, where it says the FSA EOC grade conversions and the achievement levels. Is there any correlation to the actual percentage on the assessment with those grade levels? Does that make sense? So if you get a 1, do you really get a 65 on the assessment?
No,
Okay.
no, those were assigned by
Us.
testing,
Yes.
as a way to make it more understandable.
Do we have that information? Because I know I used to have it for the FCAT assessment, but has the FSA assessment released any documentation that says that a level 3 is 52%? Level 4 is whatever percentage. We don't have that information. Okay, will we? Okay.
No, they did that for purposes of calculating the 30%.
I understand, yes, I understand that. I just was wondering, I was just curious, because we used to know that information, but we don't anymore. That was for my own.
Because none of the FSA is 30% of a grade, so
Right.
it was all specific to the EOCs, and that hasn't changed. I think they're still using the original conversion tables.
So we do have access to that. Like the percentage that would make a level 3 on our Algebra 1 FSA. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you guys understand the question? Am I
Yes.
asking it okay?
Yes, it's a Paula
I'm
Wicker
just
question.
interested in
I-
that. Okay, I will email Paula.
I don't think we do for FSA, just for the EOCs.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right, Tom.
All right. We do have one public input card about the internal audit plan.
You want to take a break real quick?
Do you want to take a break?
Oh, yeah,
This
yeah.
will go faster if we don't take a
So
break.
it'll be like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I was really hitting on that. It's up to you.
3 minutes. 11:12.
I was just joking.
I was here.
Good. Great for the guys in the back. All right, we're good. We are, thank you very much for the opportunity to take a quick break. We're ready to come back to order and proceed through our agenda. The second half of our meeting is all about audits. And to kick that off, we'll invite Van Teokum down to the podium for some public input. He's wishing to address the internal audit plan.
And thanks to all that previous discussion, I had more time to review the audit reports and have more ideas. First of all, I'd like to start out by, the last thing on your agenda is the transportation audit follow-up. If you go to the last page in it, you'll see that Mr. Mock pointed out that it appears that probably you have saved over $900,000 from doing that audit. And so you can look at that audit, and you've got a lot of new great staff, which they all disappeared.
They have work to do.
Welcome.
Their portion's over.
Yeah. You got a lot of new smart staff in here, and I would encourage them to review that because it gives a very good idea of the kind of management skills and perceptions that are needed in managing programs. So in looking at the audit plan, first of all, I don't see the second auditor. And I keep saying that you need to add to the budget for a second auditor. And if you look at the audit plan itself, you'll see that there are several items in there that are the kinds of things that a first-year auditor would be doing. You got physical inventory, you got a P-card review. We've done it at least 3 times, maybe 4 times since I've been coming to these meetings. Time and attendance audit. That was one of the very first audits I did when I was an auditor many years ago. And yet you have somebody with Mr. Mock's skills, evidenced by that transportation audit, is doing those kinds of things. And I think that you need to get a second auditor because you've seen now, you have evidence of the return on investment that you get. Secondly, in looking at, or another issue is that looking at, he has in his budget 14% for special projects in Hotline. Special projects to me would be special requests from the superintendent and things like that. And I've always worked at companies where, among other things, the head of internal audit or internal audit was troubleshooters. And we went out and we investigated things that the CEO wanted to have investigated. And it was very common, and that there should be a higher ability to have some hours dedicated to that. So I think that you, as a board, if you want to have an image of being taxpayer advocates and looking after the assets and the resources in this very large organization in this county, I think at this point in time you should budget, because I think you're going to get more than your return on investment. Every place I ever worked, we always came back with much more than what we cost. And even when I was at a company that had only 1,800 employees, I had 2 auditors, and we always paid our way plus a factor of multiplication. So I think that you need to do that and expand that. And finally, there are no IT audits. You have all these software programs, and I think that they should have some review because it's always a place where you can find things. And contracts, you have 1 contract audit in here, and contracts is another thing where you should find an awful lot of things. I have always heard and seen of that being done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We just had an
Although-
IT audit, right? We just concluded one,
Include what?
an IT audit.
Well, I know, I saw that,
Oh.
but, I mean, the thing is, that's just one IT audit. I'm talking about all these individual software programs, each of them could be some, because mostly where I work in large companies, our audits were only 2 weeks long, and then a week to do the write-up, and then we waited 30 days for the responses, and it was out. And that, just having, I think there's only 5 or 6 audits on this schedule, I think that there needs to be more coverage in a lot of different areas.
All right, well, thank you very much. Mr. Mock, turn it over to you.
Good morning, Board.
First of all, I just want to say that 3.03 and 3.04, I'm doing those together, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to make sure, clear for public record. So for the presentation, I'm going to go over the internal audit plan for 2017, 2018. And first of all, as you know from the past 3 years, I've also provided you updates on the internal audit disclosures that I have to give every year according to the internal audit professional standards that I follow. And those disclosures are just basically about the independence and objectivity of the internal audit department. And a lot of those things are categorized under, having the charter, which is our policy 7.61, which was updated this year. Also, that I follow a risk-based internal audit plan. I have an internal audit budget, how I report and communicate the activities of the internal audit department, who I report to, and obviously who provides me my performance reviews. And none of those things have changed year over year since I've been on board. So I feel it's my obligation to still report that I feel I have a high level of independence and objectivity in my position here at Lake County Schools. With that, as I said, there was an update to the internal 7.61, what I call the charter for the internal audit function, and a lot of that was driven by the updates to the standards that the Institute of Internal Auditors issued, and those were active. I reported on this obviously a year or two ago, but those new changes to the framework came effective January 2017. So in turn, I had to take those new updates and take them into the charter, which I did, and the school board, I think, approved those a month ago, roughly? I think it's about a month ago. So just real quick, those were around the mission. These were the two additions to the standards that I follow, and one is the mission for the internal audit function, the other are the principles, core principles. So those are reflective now in policy 7.61. Okay, how did I come up with the internal audit plan this year? I think everyone's probably interested in that, to just based a little bit on what I've heard initially. And just to let everyone know, I did meet with each of the school board members. I think I can say that we're in public now. So, and I listened to, I explained my thoughts, and I listened to your thoughts as well, as far as what I should be doing going forward. My discussions with each of the board members was done prior to the new superintendent coming on board, which I knew was a event that was going to happen. And in turn, I knew that the new superintendent would be bringing new ideas, new organizational structures within Lake County Schools. And I did not want to be a hindrance out there doing audits while changes were happening. It's hard to do audits when I might finish it, make a recommendation, and the superintendent come along and say, well, that doesn't matter because I'm going to move this here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So I don't want to waste time for the school district. So in turn, I felt audits within the finance area would be a better use of my time for this particular school year. 17-18. And I had obviously discussions with finance. Along this route, obviously we had the state auditors coming in, and they will be doing audits. They will be doing operational audits, they'll be doing financial audits, they'll be doing IT auditing. So we have a lot of audits going on, and we'll have a lot of audits going on. I think they finish up probably around March next year, as I think their time frame, roughly they'll be done. Report issued probably around the March-April time frame. So I think it would be a better use of my time if and I've sat down with the audit generals, and I'm not doing duplication of efforts. I don't want to be doing an audit in an area where they're auditing, and I want to do audits that aren't conflicted with maybe the changes within the organization that might be currently going on. So for that reason, and I've had discussions with each of you, I came up with I feel a good audit plan that would keep me in the finance area. Some of them are obviously things that I do from year to year, like the inventory audits, which I've already completed. And I'm just starting on the second one, which is the contract audit. And then I have to do the internal accounts for the school district. And then it's been roughly 3 years since I did a P-card audit, roughly. And then we get into time and attendance. We've had a lot of changes around that. We finally have implemented something, and I haven't done an audit in that area only because that was kind of an area that was up in the air. You know, we're looking at True Time. We're going to go on True Time. We hadn't gone on True Time. We had all these different systems out there. So now I think by the time I go in and do this audit, I think we'll be into True Time for close to a year. So it'll be a good time to look at it and see what recommendations we can make going forward. The last audit came up as a suggestion from the superintendent as a staff capacity audit, and I still need to get with her to sit down and understand the scope and what we want to try to get out of this particular audit. Now, IT auditing, didn't do anything in the IT audit area, only because they're doing a lot of audits. The state auditors are in there now doing, in their operational auditing area, they're doing it, and then they'll be continuing to do more IT auditing as they get into the financial area of their audits, and I think they do just their own standard IT audit group looks in. So Dr. Wheeler has plenty of auditors knocking on his door day in and day out, so I don't think he needs internal audit. And we just finished up the audits. And I don't think it'll be any problem with, next year about this time, or roughly the summer time frame, where we take a look at the risk assessment that we've already done for IT and pull in some audits to do there. Now, as it was also stated, the special projects and the hotline, again, we still need to have further discussions around this hotline and where it's going to reside. But I know from past experience, once we get a hotline system in place, audits come out of that. And that's why I wanted to denote some time so that there was available resources, myself, to do any work that may come out of that hotline once it's implemented. And I did put dollars in my budget for that particular event if it comes about.
So
and it's a third party.
Right. So assuming that goes through the final approval in September, then we would need to go back and revise that policy, right? We've got a school board policy
Yep.
saying that the auditor is listening to this hotline.
Correct.
But you're the hotline.
Yeah, that
And we
happened.
already contract with a hotline.
Yes. As a school board, I believe that happened about 6 months ago.
Right.
That you asked me to kind of spearhead that up. So.
Okay.
So what else?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Maybe I'll lob it over to the superintendent, that's all right. I'm just interested in some of your very preliminary thoughts on the staffing capacity. And I know we're a little ways away from that, but what kind of things are you looking for?
As I said, we haven't sat down and had a lot of conversation about it, but really looking at a couple of things. One, our staffing formula. I know that that definitely needs some revisions. As a committee that puts that together, but I would like to look at that in comparison to what other, not only across different districts, to see if we can't have a staffing formula that's a little bit more in line to some of the issues that we're facing. You brought up enrichment and other things, so that's kind of a primary goal to look at that. There's just some questions that have come up about whether we're overstaffed in particular areas, understaffed in others that we really want to look at, and compare that to class size and other factors as well.
Absolutely agree. I think that's spot on, particularly with some of the struggles I think we experienced going through that allocations formula this year and actually applying the formula as it's written. We found there were a lot of difficulties with that. So that being said, based on the timeline of when we would need to provide the allocations, would May, June be the appropriate time for this one, or can we slide it further or earlier into your schedule so that way you have that information
I'm open.
in time for
I'm open. I can move
to
on.
make some decisions for the coming academic year.
The only two that I think are really kind of etched in stone are, obviously the physical inventories, which are done at the end of the fiscal year, and getting the internal accounts audit done. Other than that, everything else I think is adjustable based on, your wishes to get it accomplished.
So this is one that I found was odd, to be very honest with you, and that our internal auditor, what exactly are we expecting? Because one of the things we ran into when you first started was that an auditor audits items that are financial, and then we were getting into a lot more procedure, and then we were spending an awful lot of time with a learning curve for you, that you were having to go out in the field and learn what was going on before you could even give a recommendation.
I
Remember
like
that?
learning, though.
I know, but
He's good
but,
at
but
it. He's good at it. I mean,
I'm totally digging you learning, except that is staffing, is that really something that is our internal auditor? I'm asking about the scope being, I don't feel like it's in with.
It falls within the professional standards for an internal auditor because.
But it's more process than it is financial.
Yeah, this is more of a consulting area getting
Which I don't
into,
see
but
that
that's
as your
fine.
job, personally. So I
that's-
happen to think this one is one that you.
That's up to the school board.
No, I know, right? But what expertise do you bring to talk about staffing?
In comparative, from what I just heard, I mean, it's looking across what other school districts are doing and comparing that to what we're doing, if I heard part of it correctly.
So if you're trying to benchmark, that
Yeah.
again isn't an audit to me.
Sure, well, it's consulting,
well, he's got to evaluate.
It's consulting, but we didn't hire a consultant. We hired an internal auditor.
but it is part of the professional standards to do
This is where we
consulting
got
type
sideways
projects.
last
It's
time.
related.
I'm just saying.
Well, we got sideways last time because I
Well,
think
you did,
he
but
was
I
starting
didn't.
to venture into an area that was closely guarded.
You had crossed the line you were involved in teachers and all that business. I don't remember all the particulars about it.
I do.
But, okay.
I think what was going on before is that there was a previous administration who was closely guarding this whole teaching area and was, I think, trying to hold true that what we were doing was just fine. We have a new administration in place that recognizes there's a different level of expectation here. And when the superintendent and he sit down and say, this is an area that we need your help on, I'm inclined to support that.
But what is the help is what I'm not getting.
Well, the help is that he's got this great technical analysis set of skills that he can go in and evaluate what is currently being done in practice, how that compares to the formulas that we've got in place, how that compares to what other districts are doing, and look for efficiencies. And when we talk about how much labor consumes of our budget, particularly in the teaching side, there's some efficiencies to be gained there.
85% of our
So,
budget is.
I mean, that's huge. So,
And didn't, the superintendent and I were speaking about how we're over capacity in some areas, that we thought possibly we were under capacity before, under previous administration. We were talking about class size and how class size caps have changed as well. So what is our capacity needs? Are we over, are we under, what does that look like?
But who is the person to bring that information forward? And if you had each department look at their departments, I just don't know where, Tom, this is not an insult to you.
No.
But I just don't know where Tom would have any idea of whether we're over in maintenance or under in guidance or whatever. I just don't see that being something that you would have that ability. That if we're going to do anything, it would be up to the superintendent and her chiefs to look at. And maybe you look at what they looked at, but I don't see how you're going to know what's in the best interest of a child benchmarking over what Clay County does, for example.
well, he doesn't tell us what to do. You just give us the information, and then
I
the
know.
management has the opportunity to.
And I
This
would
is-
be
this
working
is
with
all
management in
process,
those
and
areas of what he just said, so.
The only thing is, and I kind of agree with Mr. Mathias on this, is I think it takes you out of what we or what the board at the time originally hired him for, and we're putting him into more, and then that goes back to what Mr. Yocum says. Now you're looking at that we may need to hire a second one, but if anybody goes in his office, you'll see there's not room for a second auditor in there. They would sit down.
The school board hired me to add value to the school district, so.
Right, and to me, the
how-
finances
However that
part-
can be done, I'll
But
serve at your
strength has
wishes.
always been process. That's what you came from, and that's what, that you would grab onto in 10 seconds. I get that. That's what you enjoy. But is that, and I mean, so I appreciate that you want to go and learn it, but is that the best use of your time? Because that's not what, in my mind, our internal auditor was to do. That's all.
It's up to the school board.
That's right.
Well, I was kind of looking at, okay, I understand what you're saying, because this sounds very similar to what we were talking about before, but I also hear 85% of our budget is labor, and so that is very connected to finance, but so was curriculum and instruction, and so was teaching and learning, and so was all of these other departments that we couldn't look at before. But I also know there is an issue right now with capacity, and we have schools saying we need people, but then we do have people. We have lots of people. And so looking at how we're allocating resources, I know I shared with the superintendent, I was speaking to Seminole County, a math coach in Seminole County, and I said, how do they get you this summer when I was doing some professional development? She said, oh, well, our school works with a point system. And so she just traded in points. So we've never done that here. So that's something that Seminole County does, and we know their records. So I don't know that it's necessarily a waste of time to have somebody that's going to gather data to present to our staff to then make decisions. They're the ones making the decisions. We just have the data that would then benefit the school district in regards to staffing. So I can see both sides. I'm just telling you, I see both sides.
So-
I feel like it's a big need in our district.
Well, the feeling I'm getting from the other end here is that it's valuable, but the question is whether or not Tom
Who's
is the
doing
right
the work?
person to do that.
Right.
And so now,
Right.
I guess I would make the argument to say, well, perhaps he is the right person because, well, one, he's accountable to us, and two, if we look at what it would cost to hire a consultant to go out and do this, I think that's probably equivalent to the 2 months that he's spending on it, and we know we're going to get something valuable back. I think every time we go out and hire a consultant to look at all this, we get some colorful report that,
And no follow-up.
3 pages and there's 0 follow-up, and then if we want to have that continued follow-up, but we don't have somebody in-house who's got that knowledge of that to be able to look at it continuously. I struggle with the consultant thing because I've just seen this flop on it too many times.
No. I'm not inclined to use a consultant because I believe that we have the talent in-house to go and sort out we've always tried to be equal when we distribute, and that the idea is now then, I think there's a difference, at least from my perspective, is that if a school doesn't need something, maybe that allows funds to go over here, that we're now trying to resource manage where we need additional support. And the person that's going to tell me that is the superintendent. I just don't know I don't even know what your process would even look like for you to try and determine that. I mean, I don't even see how you'd even start, to be quite honest, even from a process standpoint, unless you started with Mrs. Luke's suggestion that you have some point system that gives you resources. And I'm just saying that maybe that would be a process of how you determine needs. I just have a very clear vision, and I also know your spirit. And so you would much rather be doing processes and helping us to come up with ideas to be efficient. And in my world, that plays a part. But the bigger part is just like I wanted to know about these renewing contracts, and so this is, now we're in the second plan of us implementing that from our discussion. That, to me, when we have $700,000 contracts that we're arbitrarily reissuing, that's where I'd rather see your time, me personally. Or I'd rather see it on transportation where it's tangible and that we see a return, and following up on those kind of audits to make sure we stay on track with the return on our investment, which is you. And we're seeing that. This one is strictly process. I don't see how it fits personally. But I'm totally cool with giving you 2 months to try and learn what everybody in the whole school district does and come up with a plan. I'm good with that.
We were talking about where it would fall on the other plan. And we moved to whether I should do it or not. I guess
I
that's.
didn't think that was going to be the controversial question.
So the conversation really began because there is a definite need here. As he said, 85% of our budget is personnel. And then what we've been able to surmise over the past couple of weeks is we're looking at schedules and class size and running the numbers on all of that. We know that we are over allocated in some of our schools to the tune of about $4.5 million. So how those dollars and how that formula has led to the discrepancies in classrooms is a concern. So I think what our conversation was, he is a process guy. He brings an outside lens to that process so he's not into the weeds as we are with it, to be able to give an objective opinion as to looking at our formula, looking at class size, looking at all the various factors, as well as the past practice. What practices are we going to change and adjust moving forward when we know that we are overstaffed and overallocated, we can do that work. We realize that we can pull the numbers and we can do the math, but I think the process part of that is really looking at the formula to see how do you tweak that formula and get a formula that doesn't lead to an excess of allocations of $4.5 million. And then it gets a little bit more complicated when you get into the middle and high schools and trying to do that work. So what his involvement will be, I think, for me right now, is that outside lens and looking at the processes and looking at the formula. I think for me, there's great value in that. And I think ultimately, you know, if he gets into it and he says, well, now I'm into the line of our work of consulting, then, you know, that's not the role that I need him to be in. I really need his analytical eyes and brain to get into the formula aspects of it. So that's what I'm asking him to do. Not to say he gets into the work and says, I don't think I can go down this road, but we can certainly adjust. I think it's worth the conversation because it does have a huge financial impact on the district. So that was the rationale.
Well, we've already established the projected return, 4.5 million. I'll remember that. That'll be at the end of your next PowerPoint. I'll remember to see that. I'm good, I guess.
Timing, though, we're going to talk about when it should be done.
I guess the answer to that is typically we produce an allocations formula March 1st. Are we locked into that particular date? If so, then how much time do we need just ahead of time?
What I'm hearing from those that are going to be assembling this is that they'd like to see it done sooner, right now. And I'm good with moving
We
it
don't
up.
want to wait till last week of February and then say, okay, now
Right.
we're going to create the allocations formula
Right.
based on this.
So it should move up to November, December?
That's where I'd like to see it.
November, December. That's what I'm hearing, just confirming.
And this will go straight across in all departments.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I
So,
understand.
so you're in the midst right now of doing these continuing contracts, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm doing the BGA contract. I think when the board hears this, I think what you said about getting into more will definitely be a conversation.
Okay.
Just
In a good way?
good way.
Yeah, meaning we'll want you to look at more of them?
You'll want us to,
Yes.
you'll want me to look at more of them, yes.
Rather than just continuing contracts, we're gonna start looking at every one.
In other
Well,
words,
that's what I'm saying. It
going
should be.
to
That's
another
what I
previous
thought.
count, you may want to hire a person that has 100% of their time looking at auditing contracts, I guess. I don't know.
Now, a couple of years ago, during the budget talks, I think it was my first round of them, so I guess it was almost 3 years ago now. I did bring up the question to the board of whether we expand the auditing department and add a second person based on how much I thought it was still to audit based on one person's ability to get through all that. I know there's an investment up front on that, but I mean, if we're seriously talking about the returns that we're getting and how many items are on his plate and the requests that we've got, hard to fit in one little calendar year. I guess that's the question I've lobbed back out there. If there's an appetite for that.
I think there's an appetite for it. I think I hear the superintendent's words that we can have what we want, but we can't have it
That's
all.
right. That's right. Anything you want, but you can't have everything you want.
I think we look at the return on investment after this October report on this BGA and these contracts.
Okay.
That's when I think I would be interested in hearing about it, because right now, he has time to do processes and,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? But what I've heard is, and Superintendent, I'm asking you now, are you prepared to, if we move him up to November,
November,
December, are you prepared for him to be a help?
Oh, I'm ready now.
I'd be willing to do that, Chairman.
And I will make the updates
No,
before.
no, that was just me saying.
No,
We all
no.
need to say.
But if, I can make the updates prior to, this will be on the
Right.
28th
Right.
board meeting, okay.
That's ready to go.
Right. So that's good.
Once you
Are you
guys
saying you
set.
want another auditor?
Let's go.
No, 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 no,
Or are
no.
you saying you want
No,
to
no,
get him
no,
help?
no.
Since you're
No, no,
in
no, no.
December?
No, 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 no.
I'm like, what?
The
We're
staff,
going there.
no, the staffing capacity audit, moving
Moving
it
it.
to
Yes.
November, December,
Yes.
is all I was saying.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That's
yes.
all he said.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all he said.
Should we all head nod like what
Yes.
happened last time? Is everybody?
Yeah. Right.
We're all interpreting Bill's language correctly,
Yes.
right?
I understood.
December.
I understood it.
Okay. All right, very good.
I will make those
All right,
adjustments to the
thanks so much.
plan
And so
prior
it's
to.
going to be on Mondays.
It'll be on
Is that right?
Monday's consent agenda.
All right.
So you're spending
Okay.
3 months on the BGA contract, I see?
Yeah, well, it probably won't be
He's
that
already
long.
I'm just saying.
Well, initially,
He's already in it.
yeah, initially, I know what, Sandy, what you were saying, but that was initially because I thought there would be a lot to learn. There's less, I finally figured it out after going through it, there's less to learn. And I'll probably finish this audit sooner. So usually if I finish something sooner, I start something sooner.
Right.
Okay.
That's fine.
Good job.
I don't look at these as in stone, like I won't just sit there and wait.
Well, I've got 2 weeks off.
Yeah, I don't look at it that way.
Completed savings, 4.5 million.
I look at it as getting ahead of the curve. Kind of. Thank you.
Thanks for entertaining us on that one.
Okay. Moving forward?
Transportation audit?
Yes,
All
the
right.
follow-up transportation audit. Wait till the slides come up. Here we go. Thank you, Nadine. Okay, this was a follow-up audit of the transportation operational audit that I did back in 2014. And so my agenda is really just kind of to give you an update on what has transpired with each of the findings and recommendations that I issued on that report. So I'll just start off real quick. If some of you were here, I did in 2014, I showed you what the organization looked like at transportation. There was 441 individuals in that department at that time. At the follow-up audit, the same amount of people are still there in the same positions. So not necessarily the same people. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
some turnover, but the positions there. And there may be some unfilled positions. I didn't denote that, but there may be bus drivers. But those were the available positions in that department, whether they were filled or unfilled at the time of the follow-up audit. If you remember, some of you may remember what the information system configuration looked like back in 2014. If not, I put the slide here. I won't spend any time here. But basically, there's been changes in that management information structure 3 years later. And the first one is they went from that STEMS system that they had for 12 years, and they moved over to Skyward. And basically what they were doing on Skyward are their work orders and their parts inventory. Now, they still maintain the STEMS system because they needed something for their fleet, to maintain the buses for inspections and that. So they were still maintaining the STEMS system on that server. Compass is now 2 years in, and they're doing a better job on that. And then they still have the fuel track system. That's for managing the fueling of the vehicles within the school district. And no changes on systems communicating with each other. So there really hadn't been any changes there. So with that, that gets us into the findings and recommendations. Number one finding and recommendation from the initial audit was the management information system. And as I just said, they did make a change from the STEMS system. And just a real quick background, they did bring in the STEMS management group to try to upgrade the system and get it to the capabilities that they needed. However, they were not able to accomplish that. So in turn, they met with Dr. Wheeler and made that move over to Skyward to do the work orders and the parts inventory. Now, there's still left a lot of opportunities, and they weren't able to really work out those opportunities so that the work orders and the parts inventory and the fleet management could all work together. So in turn, transportation management, Mr. Carr, decided to look out and see what other management information systems were available. I have in here incorrect, it's not ICE Corp, it's actually SEON, S-E-O-N is the software. And that was a company that bought the Compass software. And what they also offer, the fleet management, work orders, and others. So they're looking at that particular management information system to do their fleet management, work orders, perpetual inventory. And they're working closely with Dr. Wheeler and his team to get that compatibility with Skyward so that the information can be moved from one to the other. I call it bridges. I don't think they call it that today, but it's the ability to take information out of Skyward, put it into this software that they would be getting, and to take information out of there and put it obviously back, the needed information from one to the other. So they're looking at the capabilities of doing that. So that's kind of happened a lot since I did this follow-up on it, because when I did the follow-up on it, they were on Skyward. And just to let you know, I mean, the Skyward was really not a very good functioning system, because when they were still doing their work orders on paper, and that information wasn't in the system. So your part manager didn't know that all the parts that were out here on pieces of paper, other than maintaining that on a manual basis. So we needed that's one piece of the system we need, so that when we get a work order, it takes it out of available and puts it into committed until the work order then processes and obviously relieves it completely from the system.
And Skyward will not do that, Dr. Wheeler?
Skyward does work orders. The transportation system is separate from Skyward. It's over here with buses and things of that nature. So
The parts are in Skyward?
our parts are
Inventory?
currently there, but we're looking to put them over in the transportation system where all the other information is regarding buses. If you do a work order and all the parts are there, and you can get total cost of ownership in your transportation system, that makes the most sense.
Of course it does. So why can't Skyward do that? Since it makes sense.
Skyward is not the transportation system.
It's not fleet.
Is it a module we didn't buy, or is it, it's not?
It doesn't offer transportation, that's why.
Okay,
we
so
put it
so the inventory will be held in another system, another program.
It would be held in the transportation system provided by SAM.
And ultimately, how will we understand the value of that, which should be in Skyward ultimately? Yes, a value?
Financial piece.
Financially.
Yes, we would have to export that over.
Yeah.
Manually exported over?
I think we would do an API, Advanced Program Interface.
That's how you get that MD pull up.
See, that's what I call building a bridge,
That's
is
a-
moving the information, but
Advanced
they've got it
protocol
different.
interface.
Yes,
Now I know
they
that
got
word.
different terminology.
So is that
yes.
software still to come before us?
It's being implemented right now.
We already have an agreement with Cylon.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an
Okay.
add-on.
All right. Oh, that was the add-on? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Standard operating procedures, that was my second finding and recommendation. That was obviously updating those and bringing them in line with current operational procedures, and the Director of Transportation accomplished that and brought those standard operating procedures up in line. And it's not a one-time deal. I sat down and talked to him. This is something you got to continue to work on and improve on as time goes by, because, I still am working on my procedures, 4 years later. I just finished updating all mine, and it's amazing how many changes you make just after 1 year. It's not a tremendous amount, but still, I look through it and it's like, oh, well, I'm doing that a little bit differently now. So, it's just something you got to stay on top of. You just can't, okay, I did this, put it on a shelf. 3 years later, along comes another audit, and it's going to be like, well, you haven't taken it down. So I always look to say, how often are you doing it from here? if they're not doing it annually, it's going to be another audit comment. So it's something that they've got to stay on top of.
But are you sitting
But it's
in
100% complete.
Are you sitting in with them when they're having these conversations so that you're
Yes.
writing the process? So that they'd have an expectation of what you're going to be
Yes.
auditing?
Yes. Number 3 was the fuel management program, and this is the monthly fuel reconciliation procedures that I asked them to put in place. Because when I looked at it, nobody was looking at, how much we were buying versus how much we were using, reconciling it down to how much we should have in the tank. Just kind of like your checkbook. So now they've implemented a process. When I was looking at it, I made some recommendations to improve that. A lot of the recommendations are when the system goes down and it becomes a manual process. And when you can't use your key fob out there at the pump, and you have to start writing down, and those sheets then have to go back in and get entered. And there was some additional procedure enhancements that need to be made there, and they did implement those during the audit. Another recommendation in this was putting in the security cameras, because they had a lot of issues around, how things were being fueled and that. All those security cameras at each of the lots have been put in place, and I observed that they were there. Fuel track, that's a ongoing thing that they're working with the vendor to do upgrades and enhancements that they need to make things easier for their life. When the system goes down, a lot of that's driven by lightning, and unfortunately, we live in an area where there's a lot of lightning, and it does cause the systems to go down. But we need to find ways and procedures that we can implement to bring those back up as quickly as possible. And I think they're working with Dr. Wheeler's department, so that those systems don't stay down for weeks and weeks and weeks, so that we can get those up and going as quickly as possible. Number 4 is the safety program. A lot of enhancements have been made here in the safety program, where they're doing monthly meetings with bus drivers, quarterly safety meetings for mechanics. I think the security cameras are a factor in our safety program, having those out and about at each of the lots, and they can, when something happens, they can go back and look at the situation and see why it happened and how we can make improvements going forward. The other thing is and pictures obviously on the next slide, where they've made a lot of improvements to the working areas out there and the storage areas on the lots. So I took pictures as I was going around, and to me, it just looked, the whole areas look cleaner. I mean, more organized, I think, are two of the big factors that you can see just from going from lot to lot from what was done out there. So.
Yeah, I think the safety is probably one of the biggest one of the areas to be most applauded. Incredible efforts, and I don't want to steal your thunder in the next slide on the workman's comp, but that's a dramatic graph. But the reason I stopped you here is because in your audit report, the pictures from 2013-14, I don't know that it was overly, it was obvious that those pictures were old. I don't want somebody reading that report to think that those are current conditions. If you could do like some sort of.
No, I was trying to do a comparative, right?
Right.
From one to the other?
In the form for both documents, the full report.
In there, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You got to get in the text to
Okay.
and then to make an inference. So
Mhm.
I don't know if you can throw some sort of reference there to make it obvious for anybody that is pulling this up that these are not current conditions. This is the old stuff.
Right, and that's what I was trying to do here. It's the old versus the new.
This is obvious.
That one's clear.
This one's not bad.
And there wasn't as clear. Okay.
Right.
Okay. I guess from being too close to it, sometimes I saw it differently.
I want
But
somebody to appreciate the results.
yeah, as much as I did seeing
That's
them,
right.
trust me.
That's right.
I mean, if you went out there today and hadn't seen the past, you wouldn't appreciate the updates that have been made over the time.
And I think the mechanics at these lots, especially the ones that were working by an umbrella, are very much applauded that these are like this, except they wish that the canopy had went further out, so it would protect the bus more.
I wanted to, one of the things I had in the back of my mind to say, and, sometimes I know I get in here and I leave here and I was like, man, I forgot to tell them that. But that was one of the things is don't rest on your laurels, because there definitely can be enhancements made on top of these, such as what, I think when they set up some of these, they saw that they could be a little bit longer, or they could be a little bit wider, or maybe the location of something can be changed. So over time, you can make those adjustments, but, sometimes I think you get the bus in there and the front end fits in, is about
That's
all.
all,
the-
or the back end.
Yeah, or the
All
back,
depends
yeah.
on what you're working
So,
on.
you want to get the whole, as much as the whole bus in there as you possibly can, so the conditions are. But trust me, from, as you just mentioned, from what they had, it's a tremendous improvement. So-
Well, I know one particular lot, would prefer to have some kind of sun shield on the east side, because in the mornings, it's very hot.
Usually the afternoon's the
Just-
hottest part.
So, but
But-
I think this is great, because like you said, it does clean up that area a lot.
Yeah.
Compared to what they were having to work out of, it's a whole lot better.
And the storage containers are really first rate, really. I mean, they set those up really nice with shelving, and each one that I visited was clean and well organized, so applaud. Next chart is, I think, an additional, benefit that comes from having safety meetings and good communication networks set up within the department, because what they've seen, at least, they've seen a decrease in, I think, accidents, or not, maybe not the number of, but more the financial impact. So, the slip, trips, and falls, if we can educate our staff, we can hopefully prevent the bigger dollar ones from happening, things that people do that they shouldn't have done, that create, something more severe, the sprained ankles, and, that they happen because somebody gets out of a bus and they twist an ankle. But if, whatever we can do to keep from the bigger accidents happening where, a ladder falls over and somebody was at the top of it, and a more severe accident it ends up. So, and you can see here, even though this was through February 2017, we're only at $45,000 this year. So, whatever has transpired, I didn't go back and get the numbers, but from February forward, hopefully the number didn't increase. But even if the number, went back up to 30, hopefully the dollar amount, if they're more of a minor accident versus a major accident, the dollar value, and that's a tremendous savings to the school district, as you'll see at the end of the presentation here. Number 5 is fleet management. Kudos to the school board for putting in the dollars to the capital budget to increase the fleet, or upgrading the fleet to a more a newer fleet. We're roughly sitting, at least at this audit, roughly 44% of the fleet, running at 5 years or less buses. And then with this new school year, I think we're at, with this year's buses will be at 44%. 147 out of 335 buses will be within the 5 to 6 year range. And then, what does that really translate to the school district? It really comes in as a savings for us as a school district. And, there's, and I put savings here, but I wrote down here, I think there's a better term, and it's more cost avoidance, because I don't think we really save money in the government, because, there's no bank account to put it in. So, but what we're doing is we're avoiding costs. And if we're avoiding costs, we have dollars to put somewhere else. So, I probably need to do a better job instead of saying savings, it's more cost avoidance. And, cost avoidance on $3,000 per bus in parts. Cost avoidance of almost $2,000 a bus in fuel if we're running a newer fleet. So, those are dollars that can be used somewhere else. And, that doesn't, I always tell you there's hard dollars and soft dollars as well. I wrote down some other things, there's maintenance, labor cost avoidance. There's, spare bus cost avoidance. I think, I told you what our spare bus fleet was, the amount of, we have to have, if we're running an older fleet, you have to have more buses available. If we're running a newer fleet, you can have less of a spare bus cost to the school district. you know, you can lower your another area, you can lower your transportation administration costs. And then, of course, your parts inventory, and we're gonna be talking about that here next, you know, or not next, but here in a little bit, but we're gonna talk about, you know, what we've accumulated in parts because we've been running such an old fleet. So, next area is the work orders and supplies. You know, talked a little bit about the work orders and, you know, going from STEMs to going to Skyward, you know, we didn't get to an electronic work order, you know, which I think would be a great thing for the school district in, you know, reducing the amount of paper we have floating around because we have a lot of bus lots. And these pieces of paper have to make it from, you know, Tavares all the way down to, you know, Groveland to Leesburg to, you know, Mount Dora. So, you know, a better system obviously would be one that was paperless and that we could, you know, get, so our parts manager and our work manager over the labor mechanics could, you know, better manage what we're doing and have better information to do that. So to do that, hopefully the new software will help us along that way so that we can get the capabilities up so that we can have a better fleet management administration system.
And have we moved away from paper with maintenance on our maintenance department?
I don't know where we're at. I remember when I did that presentation, they had just gotten the I guess they were redoing the iPads.
They're still on paper.
So they're still on paper? So I don't know where that is.
The work orders,
I know there's,
they're printed out.
I mean, still, it's a combo.
But they're handed paper work orders out daily as they're needed still.
As they're needed. Yeah.
No, I mean, they're not given it's not on the computer where they can go and access it as of right now. They do
Pretty
everything.
much is through school, dude.
They can, but they haven't been totally given all that authority yet. The leads have, but not the mechanics themselves.
Right.
They're still working
Still
off of.
working on down as we're going down from the leads.
Right,
to
the mechanics out in the field are still using paper to utilize what they do.
And is it because of, I mean, we talked about this like 2 years ago. So is it because of, we didn't have the software again?
No, we have the software. It's ongoing. It's the computers
Is it
themselves.
Skyward or no?
It's another program called School Dude that's integrated into.
School Dude?
It's another software program for filling out the work order that's
Skyward
been in
won't
place.
work in there.
Well, School Dude wouldn't do the inventory. I mean, we had to have another software to do parts and
We're looking at that right now as we speak.
looking at what?
Inventory control and managing inventory control and looking at universal code, UPCs and managing that and looking at truck stock and rolling truck stock. I'm not prepared to talk about that right now, but that's something that we're looking at right now to better manage that, basically on the heels of this.
But what I cannot imagine is, I cannot imagine our other maintenance, that it has the same functionality. In other words, you have a work order, you have labor you're accounting for, you're dispatching parts, you're handling parts. So I can't imagine we need a computer program to handle that over here that wouldn't be compatible to the same function as what we're speaking about when it comes to servicing the buses.
It'll
Why
have
do
the
we
same
need?
function.
Why can't it be the same computer program? Are we buying two different programs just to be buying two different programs?
No, but this is a fleet maintenance program that Tom is talking about.
Right.
But
You're
could you-
talking about a building system maintenance program.
But the inventory component to it would be the same.
No, it's not the same, per se.
Okay. This is a pencil or it's a paintbrush. And I'm gonna requisition it, right? I'm gonna pull that paintbrush out of inventory. Either it's a maintenance part or a transportation. I'm not gonna get, I apologize.
I'm not, yeah,
I think, I'm disappointed because as I'm listening to this presentation, that 2 years ago, we were gonna be going to computers, that the men were gonna be able to check in, they were gonna be able to order parts, we were gonna be just in time on getting inventory, we were gonna reduce the maintenance. I mean, we dropped $100,000 in parts that I thought was gonna be much more aggressive. So, anyway.
The problem we had at that time was that the tablets first of all, they wasn't even given the tablets until this past year. But they didn't have the the software that was needed on the tablets to be able to access everything they needed to be able to do, and that was some of the problem. And then also lack of training on that. But some of the tablets, because they were reconditioned, the refurbished tablets is what was given to the maintenance department. And so therefore, the guys were not able to get on everything. Some of them couldn't get in, they could get on Skyward, and that was about, and get on to, the AC guys could get on the program to be able to monitor the equipment, but as far as other things, they didn't have all that accessibility.
Okay.
Well, we have different leadership now, I'll say, so that, I think that can handle it.
I think bottom line here on transportation is the move to Skyward on the work orders provided some capability, but it didn't provide all capabilities necessary. And in turn, I mean, this slide here, when I jumped over, you know, they still haven't been able to incorporate, you know, tracking the supplies. I mean, they're purchasing, you know, $83,000 in the current last year, excuse me, 2015-16, you know, but they're not able to track, you know, the usage of the supplies in their operation. It's still a lot. Now, they have brought it down. A lot of the reason why they brought it down is because they started inventorying oil and antifreeze, and which they weren't back in when they were in that 13, 14 timeframe when I was there. That was a supply at that time, but they've brought that in as far as inventory goes. Parts, now that they've been on Skyward perpetual inventory, when I did the inventory in 2014, or audit in 2014, I didn't have the data. I didn't know, you know, I tried to get it out of stems, but it was very difficult to try to determine, you know, what the movement of the parts was. But now I had roughly 2 years worth of data, maybe a little bit more than 2 years worth of data. So I was able to, I did a chart like this for you for maintenance, so I did one for here for transportation as well. And you can see we have a lot of parts, but we have a lot of parts because we have still have a lot of old buses. And you know, when we looked at it, and I sat down with the parts manager, you know, he had, you know, and I put it here, almost $19,000 worth of parts that he was going to work with purchasing, procurement to get rid of. And it's a process we have to go through here with being a government entity. We're not a business, and we can't just sell it. We've got to go through a process to get rid of it. But, you know, that's still a fraction of what, you know, we have that we just carrying around, basically, and hope, I guess not in hopes, but eventually hoping that, you know, we're going to have an opportunity to put it on one of the older buses. But as we continue to upgrade the fleet and make them newer, those opportunities become less and less because we have less of the older buses on hand, which a lot of these parts fit to. There are some, obviously, that would transfer to the newer fleet, but probably not that many. So, you know, that's a thing here is they've got a window to get these parts down, and you know, as you continue to add new buses to the fleet, and that window will close quicker and quicker on the opportunity for those. And in my mind, you'll probably get pennies on the dollar. That's I always say for the ones that are sitting there that you purchased. And I know you purchased them years ago. So
Well, and I discussed this with you about maintenance, about the same issue about the inventory was going down, you know, things were slow moving.
Mhm.
And you've addressed it where we still have some buses that these parts may or may not fit on.
Yep.
And my concern before we take these things to an auction, that we make sure that the mechanics are in agreeable that these parts need to be taken off versus that we just send them and then next thing you know, we have something that we need. And because that's what happened to maintenance. Things were taken off the shelf and then something breaks down. We can't get that part anymore, but we had that part. And we sent it to the auction in
in the
all-inclusive.
business world, you know, you never wanted a salesman in the room when you were writing inventory down and getting rid of, because the salesman will always tell you, I can sell it. The problem is you look at it, it's like, you haven't sold it in 3 years. What do you mean you can sell it?
But-
So, I mean, it's just, I understand your point is if you haven't used it in 2 or 3 years, you don't have a bus that it goes on, you know, you got to make it. I think it becomes a management decision versus,
But
but I
also-
understand. I mean, there are people that they see it going out the door and they get a little nervous because,
But also, I look at the cost of the non-moving product, that it may be a slow mover, but yet it's more feasible to have it on the shelf because it's not very cost-effective to go out and have to spend a $100 PO just to get, $5 worth of something that you already had.
Yeah.
So that's some of my caution whenever you do this.
Yeah, but my point is you paid me for going on 4 years now to count this stuff over and over and over again. Just FYI, I mean, I'm just one cost factor. But, I mean, because you've paid insurance to keep it here, you've paid, overhead to store it, and you pay people to, monitor it day in and day out, so
I
there's a lot
understand
of
your
cost.
point, but I've got a part on the shelf that cost me $200. They don't make that part anymore. There's nothing else that's universal that goes with it. So now I've got to go out and spend $200,000 to replace that piece of equipment. I have a problem with that.
I understand that, but that's not all that's sitting here. That's not
I
every one of these.
understand. I'm just
That's-
saying.
I mean, there's thousands
my
of
point.
parts listed here, and that may be a very small percentage. Last slide, if you have any questions, but I updated, the savings. One of the things I said back then was, investment first, then we'll get return. And that proved out on the buses, that we have to spend first to obviously save in areas. We had to put in the security cameras to start making savings, and we had to do training. So obviously, there are investments up front and a lot of times where we're going to make savings within the district. But in certain cases, there's just things that we weren't doing that we should have been doing anyway. So, I listed out on here, I think we've exceeded the 907th, and I was conservative, I always am when I'm making those claims of what the audit can return back to the school district. But I felt comfortable then, and I still feel comfortable today that, that just the, and we're not even at 100% of the, making the, upgrading all the findings. I think there's still dollars to be saved as we continue forward to more than double that number, so. Any questions?
So we don't know that the software we purchased last month was the routing software for the buses. Have we, no. See, no.
No.
Not that we purchased, but that we've renewed.
The add-ons to that software will
Right.
give you the fleet management capabilities.
But
that-
not the work order.
That
And
Skyward is not, yeah.
That'll be the work order too?
It'll do the work
So we
orders.
have the software for the work orders, for the parts, for everything. Okay.
Yeah, and then
And that's
working,
that
then they'll be
Scott
working
Scott.
with Dr. Wheeler to,
Okay.
I'm gonna say build the bridges.
API.
To do the necessary information changes back and forth to the systems so that financial records will be properly reflected at the end of the day for the school district.
For the sake of the report and that we're going to be approving, which is basically what you just presented. And now, Chairman, to your point, is there any reason these pictures even need to be in this part? Because it's the very first thing you hit.
If you feel they're, I can pull them.
I don't see where they serve any purpose, quite honestly.
Okay.
Those of us that actually, I rode with the bus folks and saw it firsthand, I don't see any benefit to
Okay, I
showing
can
people.
pull them from the report
Just my
before
suggestion.
it comes up,
It could come
for
up.
final approval.
We're working on the
If they're
bus.
confusing,
Pictures you see and you think, oh my goodness,
Yeah,
what a problem.
yeah, I'd take them out.
I can pull them and then I'll resend it to Natalie for the records. Okay? Any other changes or
Good job.
corrections you saw in the report? Okay,
Good job.
Great.
I'll make
And
those.
Great results
I'll
on
make
the other
those.
side.
Thank you.
Go down the line for board member comments.
I'm good.
All right.
I'll just make one comment. The Value Adjustment Board that I'm remaining on board, I'm also going to be the chairman this year.
Oh,
So,
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. And Tim Sullivan is going to be the vice chair.
Very good.
That's it.
Excellent.
I'm going to go see the eclipse.
Nice.
Stare at it.
No, stare at it. Oh my gosh. I just wanted to say I was super impressed. Umatilla Middle School had their instrument fitting for their upcoming band students, and they had a high school band director was there, the elementary school music teacher was there, Gray Middle School's band director was there. They had some other professionals that were there. They had every instrument to try. It was just very professionally handled and done, and a very, very nice experience for the students too. So.
Very good. And I don't have anything to share this afternoon, so we'll go to Mr. Johnson. Yep. Superintendent?
I'm good.
Oh, all right. I went out of order. That's okay. All right. No objection to adjourn? All right. Seeing none, let's adjourn.
No eclipse.
Eclipse.